Hello, everybody, and welcome to another debate dissection. Welcome to chat. Welcome to Robin, who's going to be listening in, which Robin, always a fan. And welcome, Watt. Welcome, Sydney Raptor. Welcome, everybody. And today, I've been off for a little bit. I sort of took some time away from streaming and the sort of world of debate because of the last one that I did, and there's been a lot of feelings going around, a lot of people with very strong opinions on one side or the other. I did that review for the last debate last week, and I got so many people sort of coming to chat who I suspect were not subscribers, but that's okay. I mean, I appreciate the interaction, sort of defending one side or the other. Perhaps they were subscribers. I don't know. I hope they are. You know, it's okay. I appreciate the interaction, and I respect everybody's sort of opinion on this matter. And Ember, thank you so much, Ember. It's lovely to see you, and I miss you so much. Ember's been sending pictures of himself on the road, and seeing the great Americana out there, which is interesting to see. Sort of the country through the lens of Ember. So always waiting for you to come back, Ember. You're always miss you. Much love, mate. Nod, how you doing? Good to see you all. So after the last thing, I took a bit of a break because it was just getting crazy. And while I was away, I was thinking, okay, so if we're gonna look at who, like that obviously that last debate on the debate con was for whatever reason, whoever you're blaming for it, was a complete fiasco. I think sort of both sides, or both Christians and atheists, agree that it was a total fiasco. Probably don't blame different people, but we all agree. But who represents, what I was thinking is who sort of represents a how we should go forward. And Alex O'Connor sprang to mind, and Alex O'Connor is a very well. He is young. He's an English guy who goes by the YouTube name of Cosmic Skeptic. Now, I would sort of return to one of his earliest engagements, which was against Frank Turek for this video. So he really does an amazing job. And what you've got to remember about Alex is that he's only, I think, 17 at the time. So you've got Frank Turek, who, and maybe because I'm feeling a little feisty and cheeky today, as I wrote in chat, but Frank reminds me of a weird uncle that you just can't get rid of at a barbecue. You know, the one that keeps asking about your life kind of thing when you don't really know him. I don't know. He gives me that vibe, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. He's just, you know, I don't know why he creeps me out just a little. And that's probably not his fault. I've never met Frank. I don't know anything about him. But Alex is very calm and measured, and which serves him very well. I think when this was filmed, he was doing philosophy, but he was talking about his A levels, which is your sort of your high school exams kind of thing. So he is an excellent example of how you should engage intellectually rather than emotionally. And I think we could use a bit more of that. Mark says, as he just makes an emotional statement about Frank Turek. So I think that you know, if I had to point to one person as, I mean, I hate to use the voice of atheism, but the future voice of atheism, a voice that is reasonable and measured, I would probably point to Alex O'Connor. He's gone back to his real name on the channel. Has he now? Has he? I did not know that. I thought he was still Cosmic Skeptic. I thought so anyway. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Hang on a second. I'll sort this out. I don't want to misrepresent him. I really don't. I think you are right. Yes, he has. So he has gone to Alex O'Connor, still at Cosmic Skeptic. So if you do want to follow him, so he's got a lot of things in here. He's got, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's talked to Destiny, Richard Dawkins. He's got Peterson on there. I think he came out against the monarchy, which I am against the monarchy as well. So I appreciate that from him, that he's talking about why do we need these figureheads, these relics of a sort of tyrannical past. Why do we need them at all? Because they essentially don't do anything. Basically, the monarchies, and his take on the monarchy is very, very good. Anyway, I've sung enough praises to Alex. So yeah, I think that Frank sort of, as far as I understand it, and it's been ages since I've seen this video. I saw it once and I thought, wow, that I said kid at the time. Obviously, he's a man now, or he was then, I guess. It's the delineation is hard, but he really does keep a handle on that, people trying to rile him up, and sort of just give a measured philosophical response, which you would hope from an academic. And he is one that I would say is an academic. The fact that he started so young and was so good at thinking critically and logically when so young, I do have high hopes for Alex being one of the main voices for atheism, less he doesn't really do the garbage fire stuff and really talks rationally and logically. Yeah, I get you. So Peter Hitchens is Christopher Hitchens' brother, if people don't know. And he walked out on him after they talked about something for a while. And I don't think that was Alex's fault. I think that he had a subject that was brought up, examined the subject, and had no idea that it was upsetting Peter Hitchens to do so. Peter Hitchens could have said, hey, we need to move on to another subject. I'm not going to discuss this anymore. But I think that he handled it very professionally. And I think that level of professionalism is something missing from YouTube debates at the moment. I think that we need to get that professionalism back into the sphere, and I'm going to advocate for that. Well, yeah, no, beheaded Kamikaze. I kind of agree. He should have read the guest a bit more and moved on. Sure. At the same time, I don't think Peter Hitchens was particularly hard to read, to be honest with you. I honestly can't remember what they were talking about. It was I think it might have been a sort of drugs or porn or something like that. Some contentious issue for Christians that atheists can sort of discuss rationally without getting an emotional investment. Yeah, legalizing drugs. Yeah. So, yeah, I obviously Peter Hitchens had some very strong feelings about it. He may have had some background that sort of that made him upset when talking about it. Maybe he had a family member affected by drugs, maybe sort of substance abuse, maybe he had something in his background that had problems with substance abuse. To be fair, I don't think that everybody that he may not have been able to talk about it as freely, but yeah, I don't think it was Alex's fault. I think Alex was discussing it, but I think that young people like this, I have high hopes for the atheist sphere taking it in a more rational place and a more intellectual place. But as I say, after I hassle Uncle Frank, look, I don't know Frank Turek. I have no idea. I don't watch a lot of him. I don't really watch a lot of anybody, to be fair. I think I watch some of the sphere that I'm in. I don't think I watch a heck of a lot of Frank Turek, but I know that his arguments are not great. They're not great. I've seen a few where he has made some connections that do seem tenuous, to say the least. He makes a lot of claims and a lot of presuppositions that I don't think he backs up very well. But I think that Frank Turek thought, well, this young guy, I'll sort of slam him. But yeah, he's not going to do well. I don't think so. So let's get this up on the screen. Things I've got coming up. I've got to reach out for more debates. I want to do more discussions as well. I do want to do more discussions. I got reached out by James Hake as well. If you're familiar with Hake, he's got some very contentious positions, which I find disagreeable, incredibly disagreeable. But I was thinking of having him on. I don't really want to platform his views, but it is tempting to push back against them, to provide an alternative to what somebody is saying, even if they're saying something that is absolutely horrible. How much does the moderator contribute to the tone of the debate? A lot. I think a lot. I think that a moderator really sets the boundaries of where it can and can't go. Now, in all fairness, some people are more difficult to moderate than others. Some people are impossible to moderate. You know, if they start running wild, it's not the moderator's fault. Like, there is no way you can hold some people to task, kind of thing. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. So I think it all depends on the moderator, and it all depends on the guests. Some people don't need moderation at all. But I think that the moderator will, very early on, if things are going to go downhill, they can set boundaries. I mean, I haven't moderated a lot. This is just my opinion from what I've done. But if you jump on things fast, people will have less chance to get out of order. But like I said, some people are just, you know, they're impossible to moderate. They will ignore the moderator. They don't care about them, you know, who's telling them what to do. Even though they've agreed that that person gets to moderate them, they just ignore that. So I think it's a hard decision. Yeah, it was sad seeing Christopher Hitchens destroy his own brother in a debate. Yeah, it both of them sort of consider themselves intellectual. I think Peter's vastly overshadowed by his brother. Peter does not have the mind of his brother, and it's kind of sad. Rest in peace, Hitch. And a $2 super chat from Robin. Great moderating the abortion debate. Thank you, Robin. I do appreciate it. Thank you. I still feel like I am still getting the hang of moderating. I feel I'm still getting the hang of public speaking. I feel that, but thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I do feel I'm very comfortable talking and narrating what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, sort of doing the stream of consciousness, if you will. I still feel like I'm getting a hang of moderating and other stuff. But we've got I think I can be unbiased, Robin. I think there's no reason to be biased when you're a moderator. I think that everybody's biased. You just have to put yourself in a position of, or try to put yourself in the position of neutrality, kind of thing. I'm going to move my camera over a bit. Yeah, and I always, so abortion debates, I always feel like how do I feel? When it's two guys debating abortion within a moderator as a guy, well, like nothing but guys in abortion, I always feel kind of uncomfortable. I do. I think that there should be some input by women in that, and I want to say again, for Robin, for all the women out there, would love to see you in debate. Would love to. I think that there's an excess of male opinion out there, and I would love to see women stand up and sort of give their opinion and sort of make their case for how they think things are. I really do think so. But and Robin gifted a membership. Thank you so much, Robin. Who picked it up? Oh, I Killed Earl picked it up. There you go. Girls getting it done. All right. But let's get into this debate, because I really want to sort of unwind on this one. And I do like Alex. Alex is very, as I said, measured, calm. He's charming. He's deeply thoughtful. I really do like him as a person. I think he has some excellent ideas. So let's go. Let's dissect this corpse. Let's do it. Let's put our masks on. Let's get out our scalpels and cut this thing up. It's going to be it's always the liver. It's always the liver.
Try and tackle is at the outset.
Oh, another thing. This is more a discussion than a debate. Maybe I sort of clickbaited. Maybe I did. The only reason I put debate on it was that Alex kind of put it as debate. So if you want to blame anybody, blame Alex for doing debate. Oh, that's beautiful. I Killed Earl, paying it forward, and gifted a membership to Erin. There you go. Boom. Yeah, pay it forward. I you know what? I love that idea. I love that idea. I Killed Earl, like, pay it forward. You do something nice. What can I do for you? Just pay it to somebody else. Absolutely. What? Ember, your obsession with the ban. I'm not banning anybody. No, stop. Stop. No. Okay.
That you say you can't disprove atheism. It's not a belief system. We're going to be talking about.
And how this started was that Frank put out a video sort of saying, apparently it said that you need, that evil proves God. And I never saw this video. I don't think I saw Alex's response on it, but I did see this interview discussion / debate. But yeah, it's a very, as far as I understand it, that's a very Turek thing to do. Put out sort of a video where, you know, because atheists sort of have the problem of evil, which is a very sort of huge issue for theists. It's a massive issue, and they keep saying, oh no, it's not an issue. It's a massive issue for the Judeo-Christian, if you will. I hate using that phrase, but more the Christian point of view than the Judeo-Christian. The Christian point of view, the problem of evil is a huge problem. It's such a thorn in their side. So Frank apparently, oh, thank you, Jake. Welcome, Jake. Love to see you. Welcome. Enjoy your emojis and your time in the chat, making mischief. Yeah, so the problem, and they sort of say, well, it's not a problem. Or as if you're Frank, apparently what you do is say, well, no, actually evil proves God. And we're gonna hear a lot about this. What was that? Samami? It's Samami. Garlic soy chicken accidentally. Wow, okay. You're literally a soy child, so mummy. Yeah, it's sadly, yeah. That's
Objective morality. Why would it be grounded in the Christian God, not something?
yeah, and it is sad that the kid that came up with that concept did die in the end, but okay, so tangents in chat. What we leave behind can sometimes be memes. There was a big debate over whether what's more important, memes or genes. The ideas that kid came up with will last far into the future. Far into the future. Pay it forward. Almost everybody in the Western world understands what you mean by it. It's sort of got a global relevance. Maybe his genes didn't carry forward, but the meme, the idea that he left the world did, and we can honor that. We can say, hey, that's something that he left, and it's terrible that I don't remember his name, which I can probably look it up because the internet is our memory and our I don't know. I don't know where that. But I do know it was made into a film, which wasn't bad. So the ideas that we have will be carried into the future, not necessarily by our descendants, but by the next generation. I have a lot of hope for the next generation, and Alex is one of the reasons why. So good on him.
Else. You also talk about the evolutionary or social adaptation type of view of how morality came to be, and other issues. We'll see how much time we have in the course of the discussion, and I'm looking forward to a really good conversation. Well, let's maybe start with you, Frank, just to lay out, briefly at least, what the case is that you're making on the video that Alex was responding to.
Right, it's a 2-minute video, and I say in the front, you can't cover this whole issue in 2 minutes, but my main point is this, is that if evil...
Well, why try? That's sort of the thing. Why try to get it into 2 minutes? It doesn't have to be a 2-minute video. People will, if you made a 15-minute video, they probably will watch. I dislike people making ultra short videos. Like if you're saying, hey, it'll take 4 hours to explain it, that's fine. I get it. Like I get that you compress it into half an hour or something. But obviously the choice to make it 2 minutes was your decision, Frank. I don't see how you can sort of say, well, it's hard to explain in 2 minutes. Then why make a video for 2 minutes? I don't understand that. Why not take it 15 minutes to do so? People will watch 15 minutes.
Exists, then good must exist. And in order for good to exist, God must exist, because by definition, what we mean by good is the nature of God. That's
okay. So here's the first point he tries to skip past really quickly. And that so if you're basically saying, hey, if evil exists, good must exist, because you have to have something to compare it to. Well, yeah, okay, I get that. I get that if you're putting a adjective as far as a spectrum on something, so things will be bad, evil, horrendous, up and down the spectrum, then there must be something on the upper spectrum in order to compare it to. Sure, but then he sort of says, well, but good by definition is what God is what God likes, and it's sort of, wait, by definition, that doesn't lead to a God. You basically said, well, I'm going to interpret good as that which is part of the Blarney Stone. Anything good comes from Blarney Stone. Therefore, evil proves that Blarney Stone exists. No, there's a missing link there. You can't just definitionally say something. You're trying to define a God into existence.
That's what goodness is. So you can't have evil unless good exists, because evil is a privation or a lack in good. Evil.
And then he goes back to this. Yeah, okay. So he wants to skip over that part. He wants to say, well, good automatically comes from God. No, that's the problem. It's not that you basically can't say, well, good must exist if evil exists. That's not the problem there. That isn't the issue. The issue is, how do you know good comes from a God? And how do you know that's where it comes from? But he wants to say definitionally that's what it is. Well, if that's your argument, definitionally you can prove anything. You could say, hey, definitionally, I define good as that which comes from the devil, or I define good as that which comes from a giant spaceman who's a robot in the sky. You could define anything into existence. And this is the argument from morality. This is definitely the argument from morality, basically. And a lot of the times you engage with it, it boils down to precept. Now, what's precept? Precept's basically saying, hey, we presuppose that either coherency or intelligibility or morality comes from a God. We presuppose that. We just assume that is correct, which is just a big lot of begging the question.
It's like rust in a car. You know, if you take all the rust out of the car, you got a better car. If you take all the car out of the rust, you've got nothing.
That's a really weird thing to say. If you take all the rust out of a car, you've got a car. If you take all the car out of the rust, you've got nothing. No, you have rust. And if the entire car is rust, then you have a rusty car. That's weird. That's a weird thing to say. It sounds like he's sort of playing with adjectives there. Like, if you've got a skinny person, if you take all the person out of it, you've got nothing. If you take all the skinny out of it, you've still got a person. Yeah, that's the way adjectives work. They're described. It's just a description. It's very weird. It's very weird.
In other words, evil only exists as a parasite in good. And
that's a weird thing. Evil only exists as a parasite in good. I don't think one's a parasite of the other. Why can't you say that good's a parasite in evil? He's sort of trying to set it up as the default stance or the default position of morality in the universe is good, and then you apply evil to it. I think he's trying to set up the good as the car, the thing that exists, and then what eats away at the good is the rust. Whereas I would probably argue that the default sort of stance or position is amoral, right? Things are neither good nor bad. And how we interact with it, we can do good things that influence things, and we can do bad things but why he's so trying to set it up as, well, everything's good until something makes it evil. And I suppose that's a biblical thing. Is that a biblical thing? Like, God created it and saw it was good until people screwed it up. He's taking a very weird stance to say, hey, everything's good, and then evil's a parasite on it. I get that may be a biblical position, but I don't think that's a very coherent position to take.
So I think we all agree evil exists. The question is, if evil exists, then how can it exist unless there's a standard of good?
No, that's not the question. The question is, how did you get from good to God? That's the question. How did you say, hey, there's good, therefore God? You haven't grounded that argument in anything. You've just said, well, definitionally, good comes from God, as far as I define it. There's nothing there. I don't think good and evil really exist, to be honest. I don't think there's good things and evil things. I think that the universe sort of is uncaring about that. Things just happen as they happen. Things just occur. The universe seems completely amoral. It doesn't really care one way or another what happens to us. I think that sort of you could say that a leech sucking on my blood is an evil thing, but to the leech it's great. It's just it trying to survive. It's a good thing. So and same is true with humans. You could say that sort of attacking this other nation is an evil thing, but the people of that nation might see it as good for some reason. I think it's highly, highly subjective. And when we're using good and evil, he wants them to be these set in stone things. These obviously, I could absolutely say he believes in objective morality. I don't think that's up for argument. So he wants to sort of say things are good and evil, independent of what anybody's opinion is. And he's setting it up so things are objectively good until someone comes along and corrupts it with evil. And that's what he's trying to say, but he's trying to load the language with it. But I think that good and evil are more what we think of things, what generally humans think of things. And that's not even the same between social groups and different cultures. Something that might be seen as horrendously evil might be seen as a good act somewhere else. I'm kind of reminded as sort of the visiting Japan, and there's a number of things that you definitely should not do because they're seen as horrendously bad. Touching people, for one. If you go up to people who are upset and give them a hug, that might be seen as really good in the West and really bad in some Eastern cultures. Hugging a stranger is seen as absolutely horrendous. So yeah, Frank, what are you doing? What are you up to, Frank? Because he really does seem like he's trying to set it up this way, and I'm interested to see what Alex has got to say.
And good won't exist unless God exists. So evil doesn't disprove.
Okay, skips past that real fast. Good doesn't exist unless God exists. Do you care to back that up, Frank, or are you just going to say that really quickly and roll on in?
Prove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but evil doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. Now, the second question there, of course, is, okay, well, if there is...
Yeah, and I think Alex has realized he's skipped past that multiple times. I hope he has anyway. As I said, I haven't seen this one for ages, so I'm not sure what he'll pick up on.
Is a good God, why would he allow these evil things to occur? That's another question,
right? Which
we spend a lot of time in the book, Stealing from God. But my main point is that if evil...
Stealing from God. Yeah, I've heard this before. It's not stealing from God, it's stealing from Christianity, which is not God. And yes, we've taken things from Christianity. We've also taken things from Greek mythology. We've taken things from Eastern philosophies. The current social fabric is made up of a lot of threads, and a lot of those threads are secular, they're scientific. So these threads were drawn from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of places, and woven together into our modern societies. So you don't get to put a claim on modern society because some of the threads came from your background. You just don't. Because Christianity stole a lot of those threads themselves. They did. It's demonstrable that they did.
Evil exists, God exists. I know it sounds counterintuitive.
It does sound counterintuitive to the average person. They'll say, how do you get from one to the other? But as I understand it, this is if you like, this is the idea of what's often called the moral argument for God. That you, if we all agree that real right and wrong exist, real good and evil exist, then there has to be some kind of a moral lawgiver or some kind of reference frame that beyond just the material universe that a naturalist perhaps believes.
In fact, C.S. Lewis famously said, that as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of justice and injustice? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see,
Yeah, so C.S. Lewis, I think he's overrated. Really, I mean, C.S. Lewis, he kind of, I think he had a theology degree, but really C.S. Lewis's claim to fame is that he was an author, right? He was a writer, and that's fine. It's just he did write novels. Like he wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. He created Narnia, basically. I get that, you know, he said all of these things, but like, you should not take C.S. Lewis as an authority in philosophy or anything like that. Good question, Richard. I think that's a good question. I'm going to bring that up if I can find my thing. Yeah. So really what we have to decide, and the things that we decide, is whether that beat was stolen wholesale without anything added to it, or whether it was a thread that was added to a bigger tapestry, as I described. So there's a lot of songs that reuse beats and certain techniques from other artists, right? They do. They use the same techniques or the same type of beats. Really, they have to change it enough for it to be their own thing. So if you're adding a whole lot to it, you are essentially changing the nature of it. And sort of artistic talents, there's been a ton of stuff where people have used the artistic styles and the artistic sort of paradigms from other people, and it is a case of inspiration. Christians sampled Judaism. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And hello, welcome back, Richard. Haven't seen you for a while. Well, no, I mean, Christians gave homage to those threads. Well, not in all of them. Not in all of them. You know, for instance, I'll give you one, for instance, the Christmas tree, which Christians sort of say, sort of put the angel on top and say that it's a Christian tradition. It's not. It's a Germanic tradition. And the only mention of a Christmas tree in the Bible was it basically saying that pagans used to sort of put candles on a tree. Strangely enough, the origin of the Christmas tree did not originate in arid Middle East, and rather did the forests of Germanic tradition, sort of the far north Scandinavia. You know, as fir trees are generally found, you won't find many fir trees down there. It actually came from Yule, and Yule was, as we now call it, Yule, was basically where the Scandinavian peoples, they would hole up for the winter. That's essentially what they did. Like, through the harshest times of winter, which is the middle of winter, they would hole up and sort of rekindle their alliances with families and have a celebration for the middle of winter. The Yule log is from Scandinavia, where they used to burn an entire log over the course of many days. That came from Germanic tradition, not Christian tradition. And they sort of stole it outright. Easter's another one. It came from Esther, the goddess of life and fertility. That's another one that was stolen. There's a whole ton of things. I could list them off again and again and again. So a spanner is a wrench. Correct, Sumami. That is correct. A spanner is a wrench. So a spanner's basically, so there's a difference. There's a slight difference in England and Australia, that a wrench is usually like an adjustable wrench kind of thing, or one with an open. A spanner is usually one of the ones with a closed circle kind of thing you use for twisting bolts. So there's a slight difference, but yeah.
Injustice can't exist unless justice exists, and justice can't exist unless God exists, because again,
Did he say injustice? Did anyone else hear that? Anyone else hear that?
with when I called it unjust. You see, injustice can't exist unless justice exists.
There's no such thing as injustice, Frank. It's injustice. Injustice. Okay, Frank's got a new word. That's awesome.
And justice can't exist unless God exists, because again, by definition, that's what we mean by justice.
And so it's your view that if an atheist wants to claim that justice and injustice exist, well, they can't really, because that's just on their framework an illusion, a kind of just a sort of something that we've come up with as a sort of helpful way of thinking about things, but not something that actually exists objectively.
Right, typically, and I think that's what Alex said in his video, that it's an illusion, that this idea that we have these objective moral values is illusory.
Well, let's come to Alex for this, and we'll try and sort of
and so, you know, and plus, where does it get you to God? Like, he still hasn't made that case. He just brushes past it, and I feel like he's doing this with his hand. You know, he's being the magician, going, "Hey, look at this hand," while he's doing something with this one. He's basically saying that definitionally, I'm just going to link these two. By definition, I'm not going to bother to back up my case. Just definitionally. Yeah, no, I agree. Earl. So IQ is really poorly understood. It's really poorly diagnosed. Yeah.
Take the points that you raised in the video in a kind of sequential manner as far as possible, Alex. But I mean, let's start at the beginning, because in the video, the first point you wanted to make was that there is this question mark around disproving atheism. That's all.
Okay, so I really want him to let Alex speak for himself. I really do.
Obviously, the title of the video, it may just be that evil disproves atheism. You have a problem with that very concept to start with, don't you?
To an extent, yeah. It's not particularly pertinent to the discussion, but I think it's important to remember that according to me, atheism isn't a worldview. And I know this is something you disagree with, Frank, but the way that people get around this a lot of the times, they'll say, well, many atheists do believe that there is no God, but not all atheists do. So if you meet a person who does believe there is no God, they are an atheist. But
no worldview. Yes, I think that atheism does a lot of shorthand. That when you say, "Hey, that person's an atheist," there's a lot of baggage that comes with that. That if you're talking philosophically, is not attached. Because he's right in. I think he's right in the way that sort of, yeah, it's not a worldview. It's just a position. You can have two atheists with very different ideas of what is true and what is not true. But I think when you're talking colloquially, that atheism comes with a lot of baggage that may not technically be associated with it. So it comes with skepticism and sort of understanding of science. And, you know, they love to say, "Oh, well, evolution just comes with atheism." It doesn't. But if you're talking colloquially, like the atheist YouTube sphere, there's a lot of overlap there. It's like when you're talking flat earth, it's sort of, to my mind, it comes with this, if you're talking colloquially, it comes with this baggage of being religious. Not all flat earthers are religious, but there's so many of them, it sort of suggests that when you say it. So I totally understand if, sort of colloquially speaking, they say, "Hey, you're an atheist, you believe in evolution." Well, yeah, a lot of atheists do, correct. Almost all atheists do. So I don't mind so much. He is correct, though. Alex is absolutely correct, though.
that's not what atheism is. That's sort of a subset of atheism. I'm what you might call an agnostic atheist. And a lot of people think that agnosticism and atheism are on the sort of same spectrum, but to me, they're absolutely not. Agnosticism, Matt Dillahunty is good on this. Agnosticism is a claim to knowledge. Atheism is a claim to belief. So to say you're agnostic is to say, well, I don't know if there's a God, which I think is the rational position to take. I mean, can anybody really know for sure? And all I'm saying is, because I don't know agnosticism, I therefore don't believe, and that's atheism. But there are people out there who do actively believe there's no God.
Yeah, so I'm a Gnostic atheist. Well, yeah, I sort of claim to know there is no God. I think he's right. So there's people in the philosophy of religion sphere who will absolutely, hands down, argue this until the end of time. Look, it doesn't really matter. It's just how you're defining it. So he's saying to me, and that's really important, which is good of him. He's saying to me, this is how I understand it. That's the definitions to me, which is what Frank isn't doing, because when he says, hey, definitionally, this is true, he's not saying to me, if you define good, it is what God thinks. and she's right. This whole, and so people, to go off on a slight tangent, where does this idea of atheist automatically means hard atheism, where does it come from? You can actually blame, I think it was Thomas Huxley originally sort of said this is agnosticism, and he kind of misused it as pertaining to belief rather than knowledge. And everything's kind of flowed from that. So you've got sort of Huxley. Huxley famously was Darwin's bulldog. He was a philosopher that sort of adhered to a more skeptical and atheistic point of view. Really, we can blame Huxley for this problem. However, it doesn't really matter as long as you understand what you're talking about. So one person who might be a agnostic atheist under one sort of categorization, the other side might say, well, you're just agnostic. I think it's important to say, fine, that's fine, I don't care. It's not the way I define it, but you can define it any way you want. Huxley did a lot of good, but that was not one of them. He definitely did mischaracterize agnosticism, and that has stuck. But the only place you'll find that sort of, well, if you believe there's no God, you're an atheist, or if you don't believe there's a God, if you believe there's no God, you're an atheist. If you don't believe there's a God, you're agnostic. The only place you'll really find that is philosophy of religion. They're the last people to hold on to it, and they probably will until the end of time.
And those people do have a burden of proof. I mean, people such as he only did it on one occasion that I've seen, but Christopher Hitchens usually would say, you know, we would never say there is no God. But when talking to William Lane Craig, he said of the Christian God that he's quite dangerously, I think, but he said that he's in a position where he thinks he can actively say that God does not exist. And in that case, yes, he has a burden of proof. But as far as I'm concerned, atheists in general, or atheism, isn't a worldview and doesn't.
It isn't something you can therefore disprove in that sense.
Yeah, in the sense, and also atheism, one of the phrases.
Well, you can disprove the concept, like you can disprove the position of an atheist. So you can disprove that there is no God by just proving the God. I think that that's fairly straightforward. That if you want to say, I guess he's talking about the atheist position of you don't believe there's a God, but you can disabuse somebody of that belief, and that would be presumably very easy for a God to do. All the God would have to do is prove that they exist. It would be trivial to do for a God. So I don't think that's 100% true, but it depends on how they're using language. It really does. Because if you're talking about disprove a worldview, well, yeah, atheism isn't technically a worldview to start off with. So what would be the difference between the worldview of an atheist and the worldview of a person that just believes in a God? Their worldviews aren't that different until you get to things like creation of the universe. So if somehow people proved a God to me, if somehow people proved that a God exists, I don't think my understanding of most things in reality would be any different. This is the thing. I think that, you know, I would still think physics works the way physics works. I would still think that things would happen the way they happen. I would still have all the same relationships in my life. There would be very little in my day-to-day life that would change. Obviously, my paradigm would have to change, but yeah, exactly, Kamikaze. I would still likely be a humanist. Yes, absolutely, I would still be a humanist. Yeah, I think that wouldn't change. And so
Basis that I've heard you use, Frank, is on atheism. If atheism is true, but to me, atheism isn't something that can necessarily be true or false any more than say veganism. You know, is veganism true? It's not really a case of whether it's true or false. It's a case of the tenets on which you are grounding this veganism is perhaps maybe you think it's wrong to eat animals. That can be true.
Yes. Yeah. No, I completely agree. Look, Alex is technically correct. Atheism is a position on something. It's not true or false. so if atheism is true, it is a really weird statement to make when you look at it philosophically. Like, is a lack of belief in a God true? Well, yes, it exists. So it is true that people lack a belief in a God, is what Alex is saying. Correct. But I think what he's saying is, or what they're really saying by that is, if atheists are correct that there is no God, if that is true, and it sort of, well, for a start, it assumes that atheists believe that there is no God rather than not believing there is a God, which is an important distinction, as Matt Delahanty's pointed out many times. So I think Alex is being not pedantic, but he's sort of going into the minutiae of it, and we kind of understand when somebody says if atheism is true, that they're more talking about if there is no God, if it is true that there is no God, if the atheist position is justified, and if it is in fact true, if they are correct on their position. I think that's more what they're trying to say. So, but it is nice to sort of clarify what he means by atheist. It is nice.
True or false, but not objectively. But that can be true or false. But then to say, is veganism itself true or false? That doesn't make any sense. It's not whether it's true or false. It's, are you a vegan or are you not?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I would say that are you saying that atheism is just a lack of belief in God?
Because it is for me, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, but then that would be just a statement about your psychological state.
Yes.
It wouldn't be a statement about the real world.
Well,
because
no.
this book is an atheist then, because it lacks a belief in God. But
yeah, but atheism is a person that lacks a belief in God. So I've heard this argument before. Well, rocks are atheists then. Rocks aren't people. We apply it to people. It would be like saying, vegans don't eat meat. Well, then this rock is a vegan because it doesn't eat meat. No, it's people that don't eat meat. Dude. I mean, we even have a different word for animals in general that don't eat meat, and that's herbivores. Like, you're basically using the word in the incorrect way.
Then we're really trivializing what the word atheist means then.
Yes.
Because you could say any of this microphone's an atheist then if it just lacks a belief in God. So if somebody wants to say that, okay, fine, but I don't see atheists just saying that. What I see is atheists saying, oh, I lack a belief in God, and here's how I explain the universe. Multiple universes, evolution, quantum.
Sure, and that's their worldview. So their atheism isn't giving them that worldview. It isn't saying, okay, well, a God didn't do this, here's how it works. It's basically saying, hey, the scientific method has come up with all of these ways we can sort of understand how the universe formed based upon the evidence. And that may inform your atheism. That might say, hey, as a consequence of all this stuff that we've learned, I don't see any reason to believe in a God. So it informs it. It's not the only thing that informs it. There's a lot of other things that inform it, but that's one of the things that informs it. And that might be a worldview. A scientific worldview is a worldview. Maybe a materialist worldview is a worldview. A naturalist worldview is a worldview. I get you that could form a worldview, but that isn't atheism.
Vacuums, materialism. Well, those are positive beliefs that need to be defended. In other words, you just can't say, I lack a belief in God, and therefore I have no burden of proof to have a conversation about why reality is the way it is. No, if you're going to say that multiple universes or evolution or materialism or quantum vacuums explain how we got here, then it would seem to me you'd need reasons for those. Those are.
Yeah, and we do. That's the thing. Like, this is why evolution is so inextricably linked with atheism, or abiogenesis is linked with atheism. It's because those are the things we're talking about could be the cause. But the way that science puts it forward, it's very tenuous. It doesn't say, hey, we definitely know. If we did, we would have to absolutely show it. And I think evolution is on that page. It can definitely show how things have developed over time. I think that abiogenesis isn't, because we haven't found exactly how life could or has formed. We've found a number of ways it could. But you're sort of saying that you have this solid knowledge of how the universe came to be. Well, everything, really, everything. But that gives you a massive burden of proof. And we're not saying, hey, my atheism says that the universe came into being through Big Bang. That's not what we're saying. We're simply saying, hey, we found that the Big Bang happened, that all of the scientific evidence leads to the Big Bang. So therefore we believe in a Big Bang. But that's got nothing to do with atheism. You could be a theist, or a deist maybe would be more accurate, and say, hey, God did the Big Bang, and you would still believe the origin of the universe identical to mine, because I don't know what happened before the Big Bang. So that's independent of any kind of theism or deism or anything like that. That's independent. You're now sort of going, well, all atheists are scientists. Scientists say this, therefore you've got to back it up. Well, no, that's the purview of scientists, not atheists.
Positive beliefs. You see what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. In certain cases, for instance, if you're talking about the variety of life, and somebody says to me that they think it was God, and I said, oh no, I can explain this revolution. I suddenly have a burden of proof. I have to offer some evidence for that.
Right.
But atheism in general, if you're just an atheist and you're not taking part in debate, I think you don't necessarily have to justify.
What do you do with the problem that makes cats and rocks and microphones atheists?
Well, it depends on your definition. For instance, if we define a vegan as someone who doesn't eat meat, then this book is also a vegan.
Right. Yes, but that isn't that the point, that makes it difficult to understand what the content is.
I don't think it makes it difficult to understand. I think
yeah, it's not difficult at all. It's just Frank playing word games. He's basically going, well, anything that doesn't believe in a God is an atheist. Well, if that's your definition of atheist, then yes, that's true. But I don't define that as an atheist. I see it as a person who does not believe in God. A person, i.e. a human that doesn't believe in God. If you want to say something is an igtheist, which is anything that doesn't know God exists, then that microphone and that book are igtheists as well, because they don't know anything. They don't know that a God exists. They don't have any concept of anything. I think that I think that Frank's really just massaging the language here into sort of saying, well, I define an atheist as anything that doesn't believe in a God. Great, that's not my definition. So if that's your definition, that's fantastic. Then the book and the microphone and my shorts and, you know, your glasses are atheists, but it's not remotely useful, and it's not my definition.
It's something which applies to humans. You can call a human an atheist. If you want to call a book an atheist, then be my guest, because by my definition, an atheist is someone who does not believe in God. And so a book, sure, call it an atheist,
but then we wouldn't have any reason to converse about anything. If you're just saying you lack a belief in God and I don't have any burden of proof to explain reality or why reality is the way it is, then we're not really having a conversation, right?
Well, there's two types of atheist speakers, you might say. The first is people who will have a burden of proof, who come out and there are two people trying to prove their opposing worldviews against each other. In the other case, there's somebody like me who, in the face of certain aspects of Christianity, I found to be not particularly compelling, or particularly, I'm trying not to use moral terms here, to be very careful. But and so what I will do, my mission isn't.
He's very smart.
My mission is not to come out and convert everyone to atheism. It's rather to say, well, here's a belief system that I don't agree with, and here's why. And then leaving it open. Perhaps if I'm debating with a Christian, I might say, well, this is why I think Christianity isn't true. Now go and do your own thing. Maybe you want to be a Muslim. Maybe you want to be an atheist like me.
Let me ask you this though. Let's just say that.
Yeah. So he's basically saying, hey, if you are making no positive claim about where the universe comes from, then you don't have a burden of proof. If you're saying, hey, like Hitchens was, I know Christianity is wrong, then you probably do have a burden of proof to provide some sort of evidence as to why it's wrong. And we do a lot. It's essentially what we do. We come up with reasons why it is irrational to think that a God exists, and that's okay. It's then sort of put back onto you to demonstrate why your God exists. So I feel like Frank's doing nothing but shifting the burden of proof here, trying to say, well, you have to show that there is no God. And things like Russell's teapot shows why that is illogical and irrational. Bertrand Russell sort of postulated a teapot around Jupiter that you can't disprove. And it goes into Popper's idea of unfalsifiability. It's not that things that are unfalsifiable are not worth talking about. It's just that it's kind of pointless to try and prove them right, because we can't, if we can't demonstrate something's wrong, it's almost no point in trying to show that it's right. And that sounds counterintuitive, but there is a huge reason for that. It's because when you make something unfalsifiable, it becomes a moot point. And like Russell's teapot, if you can't investigate that there's a teapot around Jupiter, it becomes a null argument. It becomes an argument that you can't possibly investigate, and therefore has no, it's not interesting in the slightest. It is a moot point. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but things that can't be disproven are not worth considering proven, is essentially how Popper's argument goes. And I think that is true, because I could come up with a bazillion unfalsifiable things. I could come up with ghosts and magical Bigfoots and all kinds of unfalsifiable things. It's not even worth considering true until we have a way to falsify it. And that's our main problem that science has with religion. It makes a whole bunch of really unfalsifiable claims and then sort of says, well, prove me wrong. And that's not how we attain knowledge in sort of a scientific way of thinking.
You say you think Christianity is false because of X, whatever that is, right?
Sure.
Aren't you implying that non-X then is true?
Not necessarily. Again, it's a very subtle distinction between believing there is no God and not believing there is a God. It sounds like the same thing. It sounds like we're being pedantic, but really, in all honesty, it is a semantic thing. It doesn't particularly matter, because, for instance, what we're discussing today, the idea of evil proving or disproving God, I don't think it particularly matters how you're defining atheism or Christianity, because what we're trying to talk about is a particular concept. And so for this discussion, I might just be a skeptic, not necessarily an atheist, but I might just be somebody who you are trying to present a worldview to, and I'm just saying, well, let me criticize that and see if I can get
I mean,
some kind of
when I've had this conversation on Twitter and on the show with people, sometimes what's emerged is that they will say, you know, they'll go with the atheism is just a lack of belief in God view. But then when you press them a bit, they will come out with other things that they do have positive beliefs about, so that there is no such thing as objective moral right or wrong.
Right.
The universe has no purpose. All that exists is matter and motion ultimately, and those kinds of things. So do you subscribe in that sense to something like, for instance, materialism, naturalism, and so on?
Well, for me, it's a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
So I wouldn't call myself a naturalist. I wouldn't
Okay, so here we have basically Frank getting rescued by the host, because he wants to say, hey, you've got to prove that. So what's his presupposition? His presupposition is that good definitionally comes from God. So he doesn't want to prove that. He doesn't want to get into that. So in order to prove that statement that good automatic, first you've got to demonstrate the God. What he's trying to do, and what I think he's trying to do, I don't know though Uncle Frank's mind. He's basically trying to say, hey, God exists, prove me wrong. So he's trying to get that first leg down, that God does exist, with somebody who's going, well, I don't have a burden to show you that a God doesn't exist, because I'm not claiming that. I'm just saying I don't believe your claim. What can you do to make that claim, kind of thing? So he's kind of getting bailed out. And now the host has inserted materialism, because if you say, hey, I'm a materialist, you're basically making the claim that only material things exist. Or naturalism, for instance, you're making the claim that only natural things exist. And we've got a super chat from Pinworm. Greetings, Mark, and everyone in the chat. Yeah, hi, chat. Good to see you. Well, happy Thanksgiving for those who eat and live in the US. Or alternatively, it could be happy Thanksgiving for those who eat and live in us. Yes, intestinal worms. Happy Thanksgiving, intestinal worms. Absolutely. So yeah, they're trying to angle on, well, if you believe in materialism, you believe in naturalism, you're making a claim that only that supernatural things do not exist, and therefore you're making a claim about God. So they're basically trying to shift that burden of proof, but I don't think he's going to go for it. Maybe he does. I'm not sure.
Call myself a materialist because all of a sudden you're giving yourself a burden of proof.
You
What
are,
I would say is, if you pressed me to put some money, I'm not a gambling man, but if I had to put some money on either say Christianity or naturalism, a better explanation for the universe, I put my money on naturalism.
Okay.
And so when I have discussions like this, I will argue in that mindset.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to
But
say.
you're still agnostic, effectively, as to what exactly.
Okay, so what he appealed to, and this is what I like about Alex, he explains things in layman's terms. He explains things in ordinary people terms, like dumb people like me. He explains things that we can understand. So if I put my money somewhere, right? So what he's done is very clever, because what he's appealing to, does anyone know the type of argument that he's making? Does anyone know? What's the type of argument that he's making if he says, hey, if I put my money on one or the other, appealing to probabilities? Does anyone know what that is? Ember, I'm looking at you, buddy. I shouldn't get Ember in trouble. I get an Ember in enough trouble already. Thank you so much for the $5 pinworm as well. I just think it's hilarious. It said they live in us. Okay, so it's an abductive argument, a probabilistic argument. Abductive sort of says, hey, what is the most likely scenario out of these two? So he's not saying, hey, this is deductively or logically deduced. This isn't an inductive argument, so he can't be pulled up on induction. He's saying, hey, if I was a betting man, i.e. probabilistically, which is an abductive argument, I would lean towards this because of probability. And that's perfectly fine. He can do that without making a knowledge claim. That's perfectly fine.
If you're talking about a claim to knowledge, absolutely. I would never be so arrogant as to say that I know that there is no God, or I would never say that I know that there is someone up there, and I know who he is, I know his gender, I know his nature, and I know what his plan is and what he wants from me.
Yeah. Well, I think we're dealing in.
Yeah, and lovely switch around. He puts it back onto him. I wouldn't claim to know who he is, what he wants, which is all stuff that Frank has claimed. So he's reiterating, you have made tons of claims about a God, what he thinks, what he wants, how he acts, how he regards certain things, and what this God considers moral and immoral, and where it comes from.
The burden, we're dealing more with probability than we are with absolute certainty. And you remember Richard Dawkins famously said this on a scale of 1 to 7, where 1 is I'm sure God exists, to 7 I'm sure there isn't a God. He said I'm a 6.5. To his credit, he says, look, I can't say with absolute certainty there is no God. Okay, so we're all dealing in the realm of probability. So where would you?
Well, that's not probability. That's confidence, Frank. That's no. That's not probability. He's not saying, hey, on a realm of 6, it's probable. Like God either exists or he doesn't. That's not a probability thing. Really, when you're talking about confidence levels, you're basically saying how confident I am that I'm right or wrong. It's not really, I'm not sure how probability ties into this. You can derive probability from the evidence. You can say, hey, this type of evidence. No, DeFreak, it's not a 50-50 assumption. No, it isn't. Get out of here. No, you would have to be kind of completely neutral on the thing. Oh, well, I have no idea whether God exists or whether he doesn't, and I don't put my thing in either camp. Most atheists do lean towards it's probable that a God does not exist. Just from what we've seen, if you just take the amount of times we've thought a God has done something and it's turned out a God hasn't done it, like for everything from lightning to nuclear fission to everything, like we've thought God did everything and we've never been right about it. If you simply take the number of times that's happened, the probability that God does anything is just getting lower and lower and lower. It's not a coin toss, DeFreak. No, stop. Don't be silly. And plus, confidence levels isn't probability. When we're saying confidence levels, we're sort of talking about how your level of certainty. So somebody that says, I don't know whether a God exists or not, kind of thing. That's the 50-50 confidence level. You might say, I have great confidence in my wife being faithful because of the things that she does. Usually it's evidence-based. So when you're saying a confidence level, you're basically expressing that the evidence lends to this confidence. Jake Nelson for $10. Thank you, Jake. I really appreciate it. Turek is full of it. He's going to duck and dodge every chance he gets. Yeah, and they're not talking about morality yet, which is interesting. They're talking about the actual existence of God. They're sort of talking about epistemology, which is interesting because they're not getting onto morality. And I just want to give a big shout out. Welcome back, Gur. I know you had a big break. I think you put up a video, Gurmania put up a video rather recently. And welcome back to the Gur. Reminder to gently tap. We don't do anything gently around here. You smash that like or you don't do it at all. I stand by that decision. I stand by that decision.
Be on that scale.
I'm in the same place as Dawkins. I'm a number 6. He calls it a de facto atheist, which I think is the perfect term. For all intents and purposes.
You assume there is no God for all intents and purposes.
For all intents and purposes. What I would say is rather than I assume there is no God, rather I think that everything seems to work without the assumption that a God is there.
But wouldn't an agnostic be about a 3.5?
Agnosticism, again, is a claim to knowledge rather than...
Yeah, so Frank didn't take in what he said about agnostic versus atheism. He listened, he didn't hear it because he's still making the mistake of saying, oh, well, isn't agnostic? No, you didn't listen to him at all, Frank. He explained that Gnosticism is regarding knowledge and atheism is regarding belief. So you can be a Gnostic atheist. You can be an agnostic atheist. You can be an agnostic theist. You believe there's a God, but you don't claim to know. You can be a Gnostic theist, one that knows there is a God. That's, and because you know it, you obviously believe it as well. So,
to believe. So agnosticism, to me...
How do we observe inflation? Dude, seriously? Daryl, mate, it's redshift. Hoyle's law? Is it Hoyle's law? What's the law of cosmic inflation? Tangents in chat. Hubble's law. Oh, why can I Hoyle? Hubble's law. So Hubble's law basically is that the stars, the galaxies rather, not the stars, because our galaxy is generally galaxies are moving farther away from us, and the further they are, the faster they're moving, the further they're moving, and there's a reason for this. Inflationary theory is, well, inflation doesn't cause redshift. It's the movement of any source. So that's where you go into the Doppler effect, which means that, so when a car's going past you and you'll hear right? What that is when it's coming towards you, the sound waves push together because it's coming towards you. It squeezes those sound waves together so it gets higher pitched, right? And then when it goes past you, the sound waves go further apart, meaning it goes lower pitched, because that frequency of vibration is the pitch. Same is true with light. The further when a light is moving towards you at high speed, it will basically go into the blue spectrum, which is a higher frequency. And when it moves away from you, it goes into the red spectrum. Now, we can tell by light that those stars, those galaxies, are going into the red spectrum. Right? They're basically the light is expanding in its wave because light acts as a wave and a particle. So as it goes away, it basically goes into the red spectrum. Now, the stars that are further away are exponentially going further away from us. And there's good reasons for that. It's because all of space is expanding. No, it's definitely Hubble's law, according to Hoyle. Yeah, no, I got the H right. I got one letter right out of that. So, Dr. Weasel can probably explain it, but yes, that's how we know that everything is expanding because of that redshift. And for the Big Bang, there's also background cosmic microwave radiation. That it's there. It's just there.
if you don't call yourself an agnostic, then I can't quite understand what knowledge you have that I don't. I mean, I don't know if you're the sort of person to say,
you're a radar electronics tech. Okay, well, I'm not sure if you know how it applies to light. That's all. You know, you very well could do. So I apologize, but
I know there is a God.
Again,
yeah. That's true, but it's more the Doppler one that I'm talking about for.
it's the realm of probability. Am I
Sure.
absolutely certain? No, I'm
Well,
not even absolutely certain that I exist. You know, I mean, I guess I have to exist to say
Exactly.
it. But I mean,
Yeah, and so we can't be absolutely certain of anything. I don't think absolute certainty exists. I don't think you can be absolutely certain that you exist, Frank. I don't think that that's true. I think, you know, you're claiming absolute certainty from a god because I think you are a precept. Maybe he's not, but maybe he is. And I don't think absolute certainty exists.
we could be, you know, the famous thought experiment. The universe could have been created 5 minutes ago. We're an experiment in a scientist's laboratory, and you know, we just have all these memories.
Well, you've got people like Elon Musk who do think that we're some kind of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and a big shout out to Richard Madsen, who's back. Yeah, Richard, missed you, buddy. And Richard is back in the scene. So yeah, it'd be good to talk to you again. Welcome back, Richard. Wow, there's some old school crew hanging around. It's great to see you all.
A discussion for another time.
Yeah.
What I would say though is I like to categorize it, and of course this is again semantics. It's just my way of categorizing the world. What I would say is if you think of 4 boxes like a table, across the top you have theism and atheism, and on the side you have Gnosticism and agnosticism. You say you're not 100% sure that there is no God, so I put you in the agnostic box. Then I put you across on the theism box because you believe there is a God, and that's where you sit. You're an agnostic theist, as far as I'm concerned. Now you can reject that label because you might have I know that the word agnostic carries weight, so
I think maybe we ought to stop talking about labels and start talking about.
Yeah. So Frank basically is going, well, I don't want to accept your definitions. Here's my definition for good and how it automatically means that it comes from God. Okay, Frank. Okay. All right.
Evidence.
Absolutely.
Well,
right,
maybe.
so
Yeah. Let's move it on. It's been a fascinating discussion so far, talking about the definitions of atheism and agnostics and so on. But yeah, we should get into the meat of the subject.
Yes, please,
which is the question of whether evil is evidence, actually, that God exists counterintuitively. That's the claim in that you sort of sketched out for us earlier on, Frank. So let's move on to sort of the second issue that you bring up in your response video, Alex, which is well, even if objective morality does exist, why would it be grounded in the Christian God and not something else? Do you want to just explain that out a bit, and we'll see what Frank has to say?
Well, again, this isn't this is one of the parts of the video that I'm not really making an actual claim, but rather I'm a genuine question. More out of interest than anything is how do you arrive at the Christian God? Although I would say that I might assume that your answer might be something along the lines of, well, this argument just proves a God, and then other arguments prove the Christian God, and that is fine by me. But I wonder, do you think, if you say no to this doesn't disprove your position in any way, shape, or form, but do you think that for objective morality, it must be the Christian God?
No.
Okay, that's an interesting question. So he's pinning down Frank in the Christian God as moral. Yeah, I'd rather get at why he thinks there's an objective morality at all, but let's see where he's going with this.
Could be another God, right? Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's what I was going to say, that there are other arguments. You don't get all the way to the Christian God with the moral argument. Sure. But with other arguments, I think, in my opinion anyway, you arrive at the grounding for morality as God, and that God happens to be the Christian God.
Let me put it the other way, I guess, to you, Alex. If objective morality did exist, would it at the very least disprove atheism, which is actually what the title of the video is?
Well, this is a tricky thing because
or naturalism, let's say.
Okay, sure. Then
so we don't do that same discussion.
Perhaps it would be compelling. I would see it as a compelling argument. If you could prove to me that objective morality did exist, I would certainly consider it a good argument.
It would,
some kind of
because naturalism.
Well, it depends where you're saying that comes from. If you can demonstrate that objective morality comes from a God, then yeah, absolutely, that would disprove naturalism. I mean, obviously it does, because there's a God involved, something supernatural involved, of course. But it depends on where you're saying the objective morality comes from. There's a lot of atheists that say that objective morality comes from biology and sort of sheer evolutionary process and understanding physicality and how it applies to the human state of being. I I really think that it depends on where you prove it coming from. But you're sort of assuming that objective morality has to come from God, and there's atheists that would disagree with that vehemently.
And would not be able to explain that phenomenon.
Sure. I mean, perhaps it would, and we just don't have an understanding.
Right.
But I would submit that, yes, we do not have, in our current understanding, any way. Sam Harris has tried the moral landscape.
Yes.
What I found is that I don't quite understand what he's getting at, because he says he wants to prove objective morality using science. But what he does is he proves that objectively speaking, certain moral guidance leads to prosperous societies. But
yes, that's what Sam does, and that's my problem with Sam too. That's my problem. It's like Sam also, I think that he basically says, well, morality is human well-being. Essentially, that's what he does. He says morality is defined as human well-being. And so if you define morality as that, I think that from that perspective, you can make an argument that morality is objective by saying, like he says in the moral landscape, if you do certain actions, it will lead to a prosperous and the well-being of humans. I get that, but I don't see many people, or really a lot of people, argue that that morality does mean human well-being. I don't think that is a thing.
then that's assuming that prosperous societies is a good thing.
He makes the ought is fallacy, in my opinion. He assumes that what science describes is something we ought to be heading for, and of course that begs the whole question of his project.
Sure, I think he's a brilliant thinker, but on this issue, I cannot bring myself to agree with him.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I mean, I think we more or less covered that issue, because obviously you're not saying this is a wholesale argument for the Christian God, just part of a cumulative argument.
Right, exactly.
And that point in the video is more for people who were watching, perhaps, who were thinking along those lines.
Sure. Well, look, that's a good point at which for us to take a quick break, and I think it's time to grab the bull by the horns, Frank, and just again reiterate why you believe, first of all, that morality does have this objective nature to it.
Yes, this is what I want to get at. Why is morality objective, and how do you know that objectivity is founded in God? Not just assuming it. And I'm going to love to see Frank, because if he had, I think, and it's my opinion, that if he had a way to ground morality in a God, to demonstrate that, he would have said it by now, but he's ducked past it again and again. And I agree with Jake as he pointed it out. What did Jake say earlier? He's going to duck and dodge every chance he gets. Yeah, I agree, Jake. I think he is ducking that main core question. Not that you claim, like, you can define good comes from God all you want. You actually have to demonstrate it, and that's where we're getting to.
That there is a real realm of moral right and wrong, good and evil, because fundamentally you're saying if evil does exist, as much as that may be a problem for why a loving God would allow evil, nonetheless it's a signpost that something beyond the material world has to exist to allow this realm of good and evil.
In fact, I think Alex recognizes that signpost, because on his website he rails, I think rightfully, against some of the abuses of the Roman Catholic Church.
He recognizes that signpost, that there's something. Well, don't talk about signposts, but tie it in.
Where he talks about how priests have sexually abused children. And obviously, that's a great wrong. But my question is, Alex, if you really think that is a great wrong, why would you deny objective morality? I mean, is that really wrong, or is it just a matter of personal opinion?
Okay, so this is where they sort of so Frank's sort of doing a duck and dodge. He's not demonstrating there is objective morality. He's saying objective morality exists, or it doesn't mean anything. No. The law's not objective either. The law's a subjective thing. We made it up, and it means a lot. I don't see why us making a set of oughts in regards to what we want to achieve doesn't mean anything. I mean, sure, it might not mean anything to the atheist rock that you've got there, referencing this microphone's an atheist. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything to the microphone, but it means something to us.
Well, I think that we agree in one sense that evil doesn't necessarily disprove God. I'm with you on that. What I would say is to answer your question, objectively,
evil doesn't disprove God. No, but it's a problem for a omnibenevolent God, and all good God is a problem for. It doesn't necessarily disprove it, correct? correct? An evil God has no problem with that. I've talked to Calvinists before that say, yeah, God does horrible things to us. That's just, yeah, the problem of evil doesn't apply to that person. If God does evil, it's not a problem.
No, it is a subjective thing. Morality to me is entirely subjective.
Why do you say that?
Well, because firstly, a thing to note is that objective morality. Well, let's talk about what objective actually means, I suppose. Objectivity, to me, if you want my definition, would be to say that it is true regardless of human intervention, regardless of human consciousness. For instance, the Earth orbits the sun. That would be true if all humans disappeared,
Right.
every single one of them. It would still be an objective.
Yeah, that's not bad. You know, independent of human consciousness, sure. I think I'd define it as independent of any stance, like human stance, or any stance at all. So you could have a stance on certain things. So yeah, I think independent of consciousness, sure, that's objective, absolutely.
Fact. But to say that murder is wrong, if every human disappeared, that couldn't still be wrong, surely. That would be a nonsense concept without some kind of human psychology. The only way that you could argue that perhaps it would still be wrong.
Well, Alex makes a mistake here, because murder is a legal term. So the fact that murder is wrong is because we've made up a set of laws to govern it. That's what we've done. So murder is the illegal killing of somebody. Murder is specifically stance dependent, and it's dependent on the stance of the state overall, what it considers murder, because you can kill somebody in self-defense, and that's not wrong. So I think that that's kind of a bad example from Alex, but I get what he's getting at. Like, if all humans disappeared, then no killing would be wrong at all, because that's a nonsensical thing. You couldn't kill somebody. I get that. It's more, yeah, and I get what he's saying. He's sort of saying, hey, if there were no people, then all these things you considered evil wouldn't be evil, because they wouldn't matter to anybody. They have no impact on the world at all. And if you see killing as wrong, you know, things like the current Milky Way colliding with Andromeda is going to be horrendously evil, because it will wipe out all life everywhere on Earth, as well as on any other exoplanet in our galaxy. You know, things like that. I don't think it matters to the universe. I don't think if people didn't exist and conscious beings didn't exist, nobody would see it as immoral, because there would be no concept of morality to project onto it.
Wrong is if there was some kind of transcendent being, but then you need to have that being in order to prove the existence of the objective morality that you're then using to prove the God. So
what we're doing is we're reasoning from effect to cause, that we have this effect known as this moral law that is pressing on us, as you admitted in the video. And look, videos, 2-minute videos, 10-minute videos, you can't expound on all the nuances. So if this is wrong, correct me. But you seem to say that in fact, I think you quoted, the quote was, let me just quote you accurately on this, because in the video.
Yeah, and it's interesting that he's now moved away from his like sort of demonstrating objective morality is tied to God, and rather saying, oh, well, what do you think subjective morality is? How do you demonstrate your subjective morality? He's simply shifting the burden of proof back over. He can't demonstrate that there's an objective morality that is derived from a God. He's just assuming it, and then demanding that Alex sort of answer his questions on subjective morality. He's not actually able to back up his claim.
You said this. You said moral truths are so deeply ingrained in us that they feel like they are objective.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So my question is, why would you doubt they're objective if they're so deeply ingrained in us?
Well, because
there's a lot of things deeply ingrained in us that aren't objective. The propensity for fear, for instance, it's not objective. There's nothing objective about it. It's all based upon our brain chemistry and our neurology and evolutionary process making us fear things. Like you're sort of saying, and this is the thing, like he's basically saying, oh, well, you said it seems like it's objective. Why would you doubt that? Well, you're still not demonstrating it is actually objective, Frank. I mean, he really is doing everything he can not to actually address objective morality.
This is where I think Sam Harris is right, in the sense that if you have certain assumptions, so let's say that we could assume that human well-being was a good thing, We'll discuss why shortly. But let's say we assume that, we could then say that it is objectively true that we should act in certain ways, for instance, trying not to murder people. And that would then become an objective morality.
Right.
So because evolution has instilled within us, through genetics, a drive to stay alive, then we can derive objective moral truths about how we should act in order that complies with this inner nature, which I think.
Yep, but why should we stay alive? That's still stance dependent. The whole point is you can't just say, well, everyone's got a drive to stay alive, therefore that's what you ought to do. In fact, in certain circumstances, for the good of the species, it may be an ought to sacrifice yourself. So that's not necessarily true, and it isn't necessarily in your best interest to, say, overpopulate in the case of locusts and things like that. I still think that that's stance dependent. I still think so. And I think that's what Alex is getting at. That is still consciousness dependent, even if that consciousness is guided by processes that contribute to how the goal that you want to get to. It's still a stance dependent thing. The fact that nearly all humans care about how society is doesn't mean you can derive an ought from that. But if you do have that drive to have a working society, one that is that does have human well-being at its core, that takes care of humans, then we can derive a set of oughts from that goal. And I think that's what he's getting at. That's sort of meta-ethical relativism. So yes, there's nothing telling you ought to have a flourishing society, or humans ought to be important, or that your well-being ought to be taken care of. There's nothing saying that. But if that is the case, then we can derive some oughts from that. So if you want a society that violence is not present, then you ought to speak up against violence and not commit violence yourself. There's a lot of things we can derive from that.
Is coming back to evolution. So even if you don't subscribe to the idea that certain moral actions such as not killing or not stealing have come about through evolution, the instinctual nature within us to stay alive causes us to think of those as objective truths. But it's a technicality. So for all intents and purposes, you could say they're objective truths. If you grab 100 people off the street and ask them, is rape wrong? 100 of them will say yes. But that doesn't mean it's objective. I mean, for instance, I put it to you, would you say that chocolate is tasty?
Yeah, I would, but that's a subjective.
Right,
Sure.
Some
people may not like chocolate.
It's subjective.
Yeah.
That's
a flavor.
So tar can be just as tasty as chocolate. But that's no problem, right? That's no problem whatsoever. So when you say something along the lines of, so morality is subjective. So what Hitler did being wrong was just an opinion. Well, yes, but in the same sense that chocolate tasting as good as tar is an opinion.
See, I think when
it doesn't make a difference.
Well, no, I think it does, because it's much more obvious that, say, sexually abusing children is wrong than atheism's true.
He already pulled you up on saying that atheism is true, right? So let's shortcut that to what Frank actually means, because Alex already pulled you up on this, that atheism's a position, it's not true or false. You're basically saying it's more obvious that abusing a child is wrong than there is no God, or materialism is true, or naturalism. Like, how so? You know, I get he's just sort of making an appeal to emotion at this point. Yes, we find that emotionally horrendous. Yes, that is horrendous. But all you're doing is appealing to that emotion. And yeah, what has one got to do with another? So also there's the category error. Like one is a moral question. Is abusing a child right or wrong? That's a moral question. And the other one is a ontological question or epistemological question. Is there a God? But he's really talking about an ontology, which is the reality of things. There is no God. So they're not comparable. They're not comparable at all.
Right.
So why would you say that atheism is true in order to avoid the obvious conclusion that sexually abusing children is wrong? You already know.
What? That's not why abusing children is wrong. It's because it's inherently harmful, and I want a world that children aren't abused. And I have children I care about, my nieces and nephews. It's very, very strange.
No, sexually abusing children is wrong. Now, if you want to use an evolutionary argument, the problem is that undercuts everything you think. Because if everything we think is the product of evolution, the product of the laws of physics or biology, whatever it is, then why should we believe anything we think? Forget about morality for a second. Why should we even believe that atheism is true or that Christianity is true? Sorry, I'm suffering from jet lag here.
Yeah, blame it on the jet lag. It's always the jet lag. Yeah. No, he's blithering because of jet lag. No, he's basically saying if evolution is true, then we've got no basis for anything. Look, evolution has done a number of things on us. We've got byproducts of instincts and things that were useful in our evolutionary past. You're making a naturalistic fallacy. Oh, because it's natural, must be good. No, there's things with evolution, especially things like tribalism, for instance, inherently bad today. We've got a lot of problems with people saying, hey, I'm part of this tribe, you're part of that tribe. If you're not part of my tribe, I destroy you. That's an evolutionary imperative. You're basically destroying the competition. And you find that in all apes, especially chimpanzees. We've got a lot of these byproducts, which may have been useful in the past, not so useful anymore. Our fear response is one that I talked about. We inherently see things and fear things because the fear response was useful in the past, but it can lead us to a lot of trouble nowadays. These are just two examples of some evolutionary byproducts that, while they are a legacy of our origin, they shouldn't be taken as a good thing. Whether they're good or bad, and we're looking at them morally, should be what we're trying to achieve. If we're trying to get a society that will crush all others and do all of this stuff, but if we're looking for a society that isn't chaos and people doing whatever, then we ought not to follow that evolutionary imperative. Because there's nothing that objectively says one thing is right or wrong. Okay, evolution doesn't work like that. It doesn't say, oh, well, you ought to do this because it is the right thing to do. What evolution does, and does very well, is produce a whole range of stuff, right? Just a whole range of what people do. And then whatever doesn't work gets eliminated. That's essentially it. That's what evolution does. So there is no ought in evolution. There's no morality in evolution. It doesn't exist. Our biological imperatives may or may not be good for us. They may or may not be. We have to decide that because we have the tools to do so. And the best way we can decide is saying, how do we get to the survival of our species and how we flourish? How can we design societies in such a way that we have the best chance of survival? And I put it to you, ever since the invention of things like the gun and the nuclear weapon and the biological weapon, tribalism, which is inherently a legacy of our evolution, is no longer a good thing. It's a horrendous thing. So we've kind of got to change and change our paradigm, the way that we think about these things. But objectively, there is no ought in this. There's no, well, we've got to be tribalistic because that's what evolution says. No, evolution doesn't have morality. It just throws out a whole bunch of things and see what sticks. And the things that don't stick are destroyed utterly. So if you want to survive, and this is an if, I'm not saying you have to survive. I'm saying if you want to survive and you want your genetic line to survive, and if you want humanity to prosper, there are certain things of our evolutionary past we shouldn't pay attention to, or we should adapt to overcome. And that's one of them.
if our thoughts are the result of some random evolutionary process, why should we believe anything we think is true?
Well, the first thing is that evolution isn't a random process.
Good one. Yep. I was about to say that. It isn't, it's deterministic. It's whatever works. So the fact that rationality has been developed, and rationality has actually provided a lot of incredible improvements to our societies over the years and allowed us to flourish. Rationality and inference, things like that. We can look to see when plants flourish, when they don't flourish, and think about it rationally. What do we do to make plants flourish? The invention of our agriculture then follows. When we breed animals, how do we get the best animals? Then animal husbandry follows. So all of these things, it's not that we're just going, oh, whatever throws up is fine. It's that the way that we've survived has depended on rationality and logic and this thoughtful process. I would appreciate it if we could embrace that a little.
But that aside, it's
well, let me put it this way: it's either directed by an outside intelligence or it's not.
Sure. Okay.
If it's not directed by an outside intelligence, then
it doesn't have to be directed by an outside intelligence. It doesn't have to be. That's the thing. Like if you have a sieve and you pour some rocks into the sieve and the small ones go through but the big ones don't, it's not directed by intelligence that you end up with a bunch of big rocks. That isn't the case. It's just the way that the environment has treated those rocks. So it's either directed by an outside intelligence or it's not. Yeah, it's not. That doesn't mean that it's not selected for, that it's not directed. What directs it? The environment. It's not an outside intelligence.
it's random.
Yes.
So if it's directed by intelligence, then perhaps God exists. If it's not
Sure.
directed by intelligence, why should we believe anything we think?
Because I mean, this is the old argument from against naturalism that people like
C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis and indeed modern practitioners like Plantinga have put forward, which, as I understand it, is effectively saying if evolution, if effectively it's meant for the propagation of our DNA, it's not aimed at us receiving true beliefs. It's not aimed at us actually. It's not aimed at reasoning.
No.
And ultimately, you could even go as far as to say that the actual processes of matter in motion, atoms banging into each other, electrochemical processes, those are non-rational.
Yes, but reasoning is an emergent property that helps us substantially in survival. Essentially, we specialize in things, and humans have specialized in higher cognitive function, i.e. reasoning, logic, inference, things like that. I mean, inference as a concept has been around since ancient Greece, but the idea of inference, that hey, these things keep happening this way, that's probably how they'll happen in the future. If you can't see how that's helpful to the survival of a organism, then I don't know what to tell you. Even sort of animals that aren't as smart, like they will hit an electric fence and go, oh, that hurt. To say, hey, every time I hit that fence, it hurts, I'm not going to hit that fence again, because if I do, all the previous times it's hurt, so I won't again because it will hurt in the future. That's basic inference. So all animals, to a greater or lesser degree, possess this ability to make inferential links. It's just we have specialized in it so far that we can say, hey, what produces the best outcomes for us? If we plant maize in the wintertime, look, I know nothing about corn. I'm really sorry, people. I'm not from Nebraska. I don't know anything about corn. All right, it's not. But if you plant maize in the winter, it doesn't do very well. Planting it in the summer gets a better result. So let's do that. Like he's basically saying, hey, there's got to be a God for you to be rational about anything. He is a precept. I already know that he's a precept just from what he said. And the thing that he is absolutely avoiding is linking that objective morality with a god. He's just simply saying, hey, evolution, there's no reason for evolution to produce rationality, so how can you know anything? That's a ridiculous argument. Of course there's an incentive for evolution to produce rationality. Rationality helped us survive. He thinks that well, I mean, I shouldn't say what he thinks. I suspect that he is one of the people that think that survival of the fittest, he thinks means biggest, strongest, most able to sort of rip people apart. That's what fittest means, without understanding what fittest means.
Why would we assume that they produce rational thinking? Because ultimately, I mean, and your argument here, I guess, Frank, is it undercuts the whole project.
It's this idea. It's almost sort of existential. You know, why should we believe anything if there's no guidance? To me, it's like asking the question, like you said earlier, about, you know, how do we know that we even exist, or that the universe wasn't created last Thursday? For me, it's somewhat based on consensus. It doesn't prove it's true, but reason is one of those things that we need to assume in order to get anywhere. In the same sense, we need to assume that we exist in order to have a philosophical discussion.
No, that's a very wise point. I agree with you. The question is, how do we explain reason on a naturalistic worldview?
Well, reason and consciousness can be explained as coming about through evolution. The way in which we sense the world.
But let's stop there for just a second, though, Alex. If that's the case, why should we trust it?
Oh, well, we don't necessarily have to. Again, it's a subjective thing. But every single person.
But that would mean reason's subjective.
Yes, well, it is.
Well, if reason is subjective, then
if reason's not subjective, then how do you and I come to different conclusions using reason?
Because we have free will.
If reason's not subjective, how do we come to different conclusions? How come our reasoning is not the same? Oh, because of free will. So basically he's going, well, I'm right. You have the free will to be wrong. So not only is he presupposing a god, he presupposes that a god is responsible for morality without actually demonstrating it in any way.
If reason's subjective, we couldn't even communicate. If there weren't these objective, unchanging laws of logic.
Well, yes, there are objective rules and tenets of reason, but reason itself is subjective in the same way that morality, you can say under certain assumptions, there are objective truths about morality. If you have a certain assumption about reason, then yes, there are objective tenets.
Well, that's what I mean. These immaterial laws of logic that aren't made of molecules. How do we explain those on a naturalistic worldview?
How do you mean? How do we explain?
Why are there laws of logic? Why are there laws of mathematics?
They're a product of consciousness. And laws of mathematics are not a thing in themselves, but rather a way to explain the universe.
Well, yeah, laws of mathematics are an abstraction. They're sort of a language in which we describe the universe and the way that it works. It's not a concrete thing in and of itself. So sort of comparing it to that, sure. So the laws of logic seem to be a pseudo concrete thing. They are a way of describing the way that laws of logic, the laws of the universe operate, or the way the universe operates. But I don't think that they're a concrete thing in and of themselves. The properties of the universe are a concrete. Gotcha. Yes. But the way that we describe it is not. The way that we apply it is not. And there may be some other forms of reason and logic than the ones that we're using in the Western sphere. Eastern logic is kind of a little bit different and can be done a little bit different.
So the laws of mathematics would not exist without human beings. So they are subjective, but the things that they describe would.
Oh, no, hold on.
So when you talk about logic, when you talk about reason, these things aren't ends, they're means. They're means to understanding certain things. So we use reason to understand that the earth goes around the sun. We use the laws of maths to understand how that happens.
But you just said the laws of mathematics are human conceptions, basically.
Yes, it's a language.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. Let's say there were no human beings on the earth and there were just two rocks on the earth. Was it true there were just two rocks on the earth?
Well, it depends what you mean by two. I mean, sure, like if
in the everyday sense of the word.
This is where
in the everyday sense of the word, yes, but that's subjective. What people mean by two is subjective. So he's basically saying, yes, there would be two rocks, but the concept of two wouldn't even exist. So this is why I call them a pseudo-concrete, because they kind of describe something in the real world, but it's not. It's really only our understanding that provides that as a property
This is where things get confusing because, for instance, I suppose what you're asking is something similar to the question of does 2 + 2 still equal 4 if there are no humans? And to me, the case is you have to think about what you're describing when you say 2 + 2. So, for instance, if you're saying if there were 2 rocks and you added 2 more rocks, would there be 4 rocks? Absolutely. But to say that 2 + 2 = 4 is like is a good way to bring in the idea that mathematics is a language, because in the same way that I can say,
but it's not an arbitrary language.
Well, it is.
In fact, language itself is based on mathematics, and that's not arbitrary.
I'd say it's absolutely arbitrary.
Math is arbitrary?
No, math isn't, but the language we use to describe it is. It evolves and changes.
Well, yes, but they're referencing objective facts. If we want to call this one book, there is only one book here.
Yes.
Okay, that's an objective fact. If we wanted to call it eins, like in Deutsch, that this is one book, okay, that's a different word, but it's representing the same objective fact. And if we're going to say that reasoning is objective, then there's no way we can come to any conclusions about anything.
There are different ways, even within the laws of mathematics.
Did I say objective or subjective?
I don't recall now.
If we're going to say reason is subjective, then there's no way we can come to any conclusions about anything. But that's self-defeating, because when I say that,
no, I haven't heard of that, Titan. But yeah, so he's basically saying, well, if these laws are subjective, if they're just a created structure that humans created, then we can't know anything. We can't think. And so when you think about these things, as Alex said, like he wants absolute certainty. He wants absolute certainty. So we use these languages to describe our reality, or the apparent reality that we live in, the one that we see around us every day. He's not going to get to absolute certainty. He's not going to get to this, well, because reality, these because objectively there is still 2 rocks, yes, objectively. But the whole idea of 2 doesn't exist. It's just that is the state of being, is that you have one rock and you have another rock. He wants to get to absolute certainty from rationality, and I don't think you can. I think that we basically say, hey, we're going to presuppose that our rationality and our logic does apply in the real world, that is a correct description of the real world and how it works, because we don't really have a choice. The base fundamentals, if you take those away, everything becomes meaningless and incoherent. So you can say, hey, these concepts are objective, but then you have to demonstrate the objective nature of them, which Frank obviously won't do.
I'm making a truth claim that if reason is subjective, then we can't come to any true conclusions about anything. That actually is an objective truth claim.
Well, I would say that even with
an objective truth claim, no. What? No. Like I said, you won't even have absolute certainty. So someone made a joke, I think it was Titan, that like you don't have absolute certainty of anything. And he said, so you hear a lot, and he said something similar. It's sort of, are you absolutely certain of that? The answer is no, including that fact that we don't have absolute certainty of anything. Are you absolutely certain? No. What did I just say? So, I don't think absolute certainty exists, but I could be wrong. I'm not even absolutely certain of that. I could be wrong. Maybe absolute certainty can be achieved. Maybe it can. I don't have absolute confidence of that either.
Something as objective as maths. There are subjective ways in which to understand it, the language we use, even though it seems that it wouldn't be the case. For instance, if you want to find the roots of a quadratic equation, you can do it by using the quadratic formula. You can do it by expanding the brackets, and you get to the same answer. But the reason you're using to get there is subjective. So the answer is a fact of nature. It's true. That would still be the answer even if humans didn't exist. But the language we use to get there, and the reason that we use to get there, wouldn't.
Yeah, but the reason is objective, but there's different levels here. You have ontology, which is the study of being.
Sure.
Okay. You have epistemology. That's how we know the study of being. Then you might have semantics, which is how you describe the epistemology to get to the ontology.
Sure.
This can be arbitrary, but it's still tethered to objective facts. It's ultimately tethered to an objective ontology.
So yeah, we agree that it's tethered to a concrete, but if the way we can describe how to get there is completely different, then the logic will be different and the rationality will be different. And that's fine. And that's what he's saying. You two are being rational and using two different versions of rationality to try and get to where you're going. But because you've arrived at different places, and that's the ontology, he's arrived that he doesn't believe a God exists. You've arrived that you know that a God exists. Because you've arrived at different places, one of you has to be wrong. This is the thing. Like, it's not just subjective. Ontology is not subjective. But the way that you get there may be completely different. And that's all that logic and rationality is trying to do.
What are the tenets of objective reason to you?
Well, start with the basic laws of logic, that they're,
For instance,
The law of the excluded middle, things like that.
Law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle, law of inference.
That's the law of identity, Frank. That's not one of the law of inference. Isn't one of them. Law of identity, law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle. If you believe, oh, Frank, Uncle Frank, what are you doing?
Law of identity. Those are the essentials of the laws of logic, and you start with those. And then you use your sense perceptions to draw conclusions about the real world using those tools.
Yeah, but you have to presuppose your senses as well. I've often discussed this sort of, how do you know your senses are describing something real? You don't, because the only way to confirm it is with senses. Even if somebody independent tells you, you're still using your senses. Like, this is the problem. He's sort of going down hard solipsism. Still, Frank, you still haven't tied in objective morality to a God. Let's just concede that morality is objective. How do you tie it in with a God? You're basically just sort of going, oh, well, it can't be subjective because then there would be no sort of objective rationale. No, that's not what we're saying.
Those objective laws of logic.
They're tools, and this is the thing that I see when we're talking about whether reason exists. Reason is a method, and so it almost
helps us in epistemology, but if they weren't tethered ontologically, if they weren't tethered to reality, there'd be no way we could know anything.
You're making the claim that this realm exists that we call the laws of logic and so on, and that it really is something that we discover in that sense.
Yes.
It's an element of the reality we live in.
We don't determine them; we discover them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas you're making the case, obviously, Alex,
that
reason
is not something we discover.
Produce. It's something we invent because it helps us.
But you see, that's an objective truth claim right there. That's why it's self-defeating. Alex is saying it's objectively true that reason is subjective.
And the same applies to the moral argument as well, which is you're saying there's this realm of real right and wrong, good and evil. And you're saying, no, these are just concepts we invent. We don't discover them, but we invent them. And I know many people whose journey to belief in God.
Well, it's got to tie in to something real. But the way that we do it, it can vary. The way that we form logic can vary. And Daryl's brought up logic gates, and I get you, it ties into something real, but so it's describing properties, but the gates that we're using is a language. It's just showing how we can do this in one way.
Has been based on the fact that they came to the view that there really is a realm of right and wrong that I discover. I no longer believe that it's all subjective. And obviously others who take your view as well, Alex. I mean, fundamentally, is that where do we just come to an impasse where you say, Frank, there is real realms of, these objective laws of logic, and there's real realm of good and evil, and you just say, no, in my opinion, it can all be explained as a subjective? Because ultimately, I believe in objective moral good and evil, because for me, I see that as a bit like I see racism is wrong is the same as 1 + 1 = 2. But you say no, that racism doesn't exist when humans don't exist.
I agree with you that I see it as the same. To me, they are both as instinctual.
Yeah.
But that 1 + 1 = 2 is, again, it's a mathematical language. But if you're talking in the literal sense that one thing and another thing equals two things, then yes, that is objectively true. But to say that racism is wrong, although it feels just as instinctively true, it doesn't have the same objective grounding.
Say you were living
reality.
a few hundred years ago in the American South, and maybe racism is kind of just part of the culture. That's the accepted way of things, at least within the white population, let's say. Because that's the generally accepted de facto, way of people thinking about it, would that mean racism is okay in that culture? Because that's,
well, it's a difficult question. I would say no. If you dropped me in that culture, I would say no.
But if you had grown up in that culture, you'd probably say yes, because it's subjective.
You might find people who would argue that it is, and it is a subjective opinion. But I think now, because we have, it's not just a case that we've developed.
So essentially, he's saying, hey, there's nothing in the universe that is saying, hey, racism is wrong. that's wrong, like passing that down as some objective standard. Now, I think atheists that appeal to objective morality would say, hey, slavery is not good for survival, it's not good for the slave, and it's not good for the master. In fact, it benefits nobody. That's how they'd objectively tie it down. But that is only true if you subscribe to the society flourishing and not one person destroying another, which I don't think there's anything in the universe to say, hey, you've got to succeed by a flourishing society. I don't think there's anything that says that. So as much as it pains us to say, hey, that is wrong because we have learnt a lot about society, we can't say it's objectively wrong. We can't say if all humans were taken out of the universe, slavery would still be wrong. All consciousness out of the universe, that slavery would still be wrong. It's sort of, there's nobody to feel anything about slavery because no one's enslaved. So, yeah, ants do herd aphids, but because aphids are a different species, that's not technically slavery. It's more like it's more like animal husbandry. It's more like they are practicing the domestication rather than anything else. You could say that there is a species of ant, or is it a bee? I think it's ants that go in and they kill the other queen and then take over the ant's nest and copy their chemical scent in order to take over ants. I think it's called the slave maker ant. That you could see as slavery. Yes, that would probably be slavery. So that's a better example for you there. I think it's called the slave maker ants. Tangents in chat. Yeah, yep. So they capture broods of other ant species to increase the worker force of their colony. So you could argue that that's probably a better example. But yeah, I see it's sort of arguing from, like, so number one, Frank's making appeal to emotion. Well, if you don't think slavery is objectively immoral, you can't say it's really immoral, therefore it feels bad. Yeah, it doesn't matter what it feels, Frank. The other thing is he's pure unadulterated. Absolutely, I'm good on tangents. Look, there's Bree. She can tell you all about slave maker ants. I bet she can. The other thing is he's not only doing an appeal to emotion, he's kind of doing an appeal to consequence. So what that means is, well, if it turns out that there is no objective morality, that's bad, right? That's not a good thing. Well, for a start, if there's no objective morality, it's just subjective that it's bad. And sure, that's true. Subjectively, you think it's bad, but it's also, just say it is bad. Okay, you're basically going, well, the consequences are horrendous. It's like saying, well, I can't be. It's sort of saying, hey, I don't like the consequences for this being true. You know, I could say, well, I've got to win the lotto tomorrow because if not, I'll be working in a factory all my life, or something like that, or working at my desk all my life. That isn't it doesn't follow that because you don't like the consequences, then it has to be true. So essentially what Frank's saying is, well, if there's no objective morality, we can't objectively say things are right and wrong. I don't like that. Well, okay, you don't like it. It doesn't matter, Frank. It doesn't matter what you like and what you don't like. Ontology, or what is true, is completely separate from your likes and dislikes. It may be the case that there is nothing objectively horrendous about sort of Hitler killing tons of people. There might be nothing objectively bad about that. That may be stance dependent. The fact that you don't like it doesn't matter. The universe may not care about what happens to humans, and does not seem to have done so in the past. There's no, a God who finds it morally objectionable didn't do anything, and your crutch is free will. Oh, well, he had the free will to do that. Well, great. But it's all getting away with, and I think that you can ground morality in what people's objective is, so what their meta ethics is, what their goal is essentially, and whether their actions do adhere to that goal. So I can say that the Nazis who wanted to create a Third Reich and contribute to the prosperity of the German people and the Aryan race, what they did was immoral because the actions they took do not get them against that goal, to that goal, right? So the actions they took, even under their own system of morality, with the goal being to have the Third Reich as the glorious nation that would persist forever, the actions they took were immoral even under their own subjective morality, because it did not get them to that goal. In fact, attacking the Jews, attacking Poland, attacking Russia, they're all things that took them away from that goal. They're all things that contributed to them not getting there. Bad actions, horrendous actions, because people would step in to stop them from committing atrocities. It's antithetical to what they were trying to achieve. So even under their own morality, I think they were bad. And I think that's how I can square it under their own morality. But even if that wasn't the case, and we're getting away from the central issue, prove that good comes from God. All you're doing is saying, hey, I don't like it that you think that there's no objective morality. If there's no objective morality, things are bad in the universe. So what? So what? You still haven't demonstrated that there's an objective morality. All he's doing is trying to shift the burden of proof back onto Alex.
Our understanding of morality, we've made it better. We now have.
You're dropping in a moral claim there. You said it's better, which suggests it's traveling.
But again,
towards
when I say better,
an objective standard.
I do admit I'm making the assumption that we are striving for human prosperity, which is an absolute assumption. That isn't objectively good, but it's instilled with us within evolution.
Right. The human prosperity may be great for humans. It might not be so great for, pandas, for instance, or what's another species that we're horrendously displacing? It may not be good for other species. That's the thing. It all comes down to, it might not be good for schools of fish that are affected by pollution, or just some other animal. Our good and evil are really is based upon what we think as humans. And the reason why we all have a tendency to think that human flourishing is good is because we are human. And yes, it can be true that is guided by evolution, that evolutionarily speaking, we are predisposed to think that human flourishing is good. However, that's not always the case, and it might not be the case. That's still stance dependent. The fact that has been, sometimes you could argue that that's been hardwired into us, but I don't think that's the case. I still think it's stance dependent. The fact that we get this stance partially from evolution, it doesn't really matter. And there are people that think that sort of humans are doing a lot of harm in the world, that they're not for human flourishing. They might be for other animal flourishing. They might be antinatalists who think that, humans do nothing but cause suffering, and so that we shouldn't breed, and therefore humans will eventually go away. There are people that aren't interested in human flourishing. So it really is subjective. Some people are only interested in their own flourishing and not other humans.
I can't explain why this thing is good. But it just, when I say good, I don't
It's
mean,
your, at the end of the day, it's still just your preference.
when I say
the thing you
good,
happen to
good and
believe.
evil, the words we use for me are just emotional translations of the words beneficial and detrimental.
I like what Louise Antony said in her debate with William Lane Craig. Louise Antony is an atheist, but she admitted something about morality and atheism that I think is very insightful. Here's what she said. This is her quote. She said, "Any argument for moral skepticism will be based upon premises which are less obvious than the existence of objective moral values themselves." In other words, here she is as an atheist saying,
less obvious than objective moral values themselves. Well, yeah, I don't think she's admitting. I think that it feels like morality is objective, and I think it's kind of like we kind of act like morals are objective. I think that is sort of, as Alex was pointing out, I think that's something that we do because it's the way we can function. That's the way we function. We act like these things are absolutely set in stone, but I don't think they are. I think they are still, to a large degree, culturally based, or sort of based in the way that we have been brought up thinking that they are. But I think that we sort of get taught to think our morals are objective.
I have this sense of moral obligation that is so strong that any argument you give me for atheism or moral subjectivism will be based on the weaker premises than just the sense that I have that objective moral values and obligations exist.
Yeah, that's not doesn't make it true. Again, you're making an appeal to emotion. It feels true, therefore it's true. That's just an appeal to emotion. It doesn't mean anything, Frank. You're basically making the same mistake as people going, well, I feel like God is real, therefore he's real. It doesn't mean anything.
So that was my question originally to you, Alex, is why would you deny the strongest belief that you have intuitively and adopt a weaker belief?
Because intuition can be wrong. Because intuition can be dead wrong. We have a tendency to intuitively see things where there are not things, right? So if you've ever heard a noise in your house and you've gone, oh, that could be a burglar, that's your intuition. And apart from once, well, actually, to be honest with you, I've occasionally thought that. And the one time I didn't think that, there was actually a burglar in my house. It sucked, like seriously, absolutely dreadful. So that idea that you see a shadow and it moves in your house, it's someone in my house, it's got to be this thing, is your intuition. And that's why Americans, sorry, Americans, you know I love you, but that's why they have a tendency to shoot their family members more than burglars. Because that's where your intuition leads. And as I've said before, intuition's really good for making snap decisions. It's very good for, I think you're 3 times more likely to shoot a family member than a burglar, something like that. I can't remember the statistic. Don't take my my thing on it. But it is the case that our intuitions jump very fast, quick decision making. It doesn't mean it's the best way to get you to the truth. Having rationality and being able to stop and go, okay, what are all the things that I can see that would add up to this being the scenario as opposed to that? So rational and conscious thought, inference and deduction, all of these tools we can use will arrive at a much better place. However, it takes time. It's slow. And from evolution, we can't think slowly. Have to be quick, because the person that does not use instinct and think quick is eaten by the tiger, right? You got to act straight away. So if you see the bushes rustle, it is the guy out and ready with his spear than the person sitting down to think whether it could be a tiger that is going to survive. That's it. It doesn't mean it's useful now.
In atheism or agnosticism?
Well, I don't deny it, because I don't deny, like I say, as long as I do have certain assumptions, and I admit that there are assumptions, I can say that I have an objective sense that these things are wrong on the assumption that I'm aiming for human prosperity.
Right, but you already pointed out that Sam
So
Harris...
that's meta-ethical relativism. If we can agree that human prosperity is important, then we can make some they're not objective, because objective suggests without minds present, etc. That was his idea of objective. But we sort of can say, hey, these things will get us to that goal or won't get us to that goal. These things are beneficial with respect to that goal or not beneficial with respect to that goal. And it's like Frank wants to go, well, yeah, but then why would you like?
Is begging the question on that. That is his human flourishing. And that's a conflation of epistemology and ontology. And as you pointed out, rightfully so, and 18 years old, he's already figured this out, which I didn't know this is 18, that Sam Harris is confusing epistemology and ontology. He's assuming what he's trying to prove.
But the problem with Sam Harris's argument is he's going in there trying to show that certain things are right or wrong based on science. What I'm trying to do is say why people experience things as right or wrong based on science, which can be done. So I can say the reason that I feel that this is right and wrong is because of this. What I can't say is that this is right or wrong because of this.
I mean,
yeah, sure. Yeah, we're trying to say, well, evolution says that it contributes to why you feel it's right and wrong. But, beautiful. Alex is correct. He's saying that this is why we feel it's objectively right and wrong, but he's not saying it is objectively right and wrong. That is so beautiful. And yeah, evolution says, hey, for us to feel things are right and wrong so deeply is a part of evolutionary byproduct. It is what we have come to know, because without feeling that way, we wouldn't act so strongly on it. And so it's a guiding process. It can guide us through survival because we feel like it is the case. Look, you have lots of regions of your brain. What it sort of the human brain is incredible, not just because of sort of the things that it does, but because there is a whole bunch of other people, if you will, communicating with you. You have all these other aspects. It's interesting to note that a split brain patient, someone who's had the corpus callosum split down the middle, has two separate personalities. Like they really will have different beliefs, different goals, like you will literally are in two minds. Part of psychology is understanding schemas and how these different people in you, some being the critical parent and the sort of the vulnerable child and the healthy adult, all of these different people inside you relate to one another. And a lot of dissociative disorders are when these parts of your brain schisms from each other. Usually they are working in accordance, but dissociation is when these parts do schism. And DID, dissociative identity disorder, is when they schism and form into their own personality rather than a amalgam or a gestalt personality based upon the different parts of your brain. But understanding how these different parts of your brain take over is fascinating, mostly due to the circumstances and the emotions and the circumstances that you're in. It's absolutely fascinating one. More tangents in chat. Look, if anyone thinks they can out-tangent me, how dare you? How dare you? But yeah, in a sense, what we are a gestalt, like a formation, an amalgamation of these different personalities that are all working in concert. And the way they work together is just fascinating. Samami, no, it's not. No, it's not. No. I mean, the term is made up. All terms are made up. It's the multiple personality disorder that was made up. They just didn't understand it, kind of thing. It wasn't a real thing. But dissociative identity disorder is definitely a thing. They used to call it split personality. It isn't. They have said that it's multiple personalities. It isn't. Well, it's in the DRM-5, so it's not. it's part of a series of dissociative disorders. So it definitely, okay. Well, I mean, you know, if you could cite me on that, I would be grateful, Sumami, because there are a whole bunch of dissociative disorders, dissociative being like schizophrenia. There's dissociative disorders such as dissociative epilepsy. There's a whole bunch of them. So I was sure it was in the DRM. I was sure it was. Yeah, it does say it's a controversial diagnosis, but yeah, I mean, it is in the DSM-5, DSM-5. It's got me saying that wrong. Well, you know, I get that it might be controversial, but and don't get me wrong, I think there are a lot of people that sort of make it up in order to gain things, but DSMV, thanks buddy. I think that dissociative disorders definitely do exist, and that I think that it does describe one of those dissociative disorders. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that a lot of people do sort of use it to make money, but I'm not in a position to say who does and who doesn't. All I can sort of point to is the DSM, and I'm not a psychologist myself, so I realize it's contentious, but I wouldn't say that it's made up.
Does this mean, is it a problem for you then, telling people what they ought to do? Because there's a sense in which, you know, if you see a society being racist or treating women unequally or whatever it might be,
or Catholic priests,
yeah, it's not a problem, because if we see if we see well, if we agree that human flourishing is important, then or human society is important, and a society that is beneficial to the well-beings of humans is important, then we can sort of give a series of oughts if you want that to be the case. There's no problem with that. There's no problem with that at all. No, I agree. The multiple personalities. Oh, I said, well, a bull. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. But dissociative identity disorder is a real disorder. I think we've got a problem with the terminology. Anyway, we're sort of tangenting on, so let's get it back on track. Let's go back to the thing. But I'd love to talk about it with you another time, Samami. I would love to see why you think it is not a real thing. And you know, I'm open to it, but that's not for today. So but I think what he's getting at, what Alex is getting at, is that, yeah, we can, as long as that's important to you. If you don't think the flourishing of our society is important, well, that's fine, but what are you doing in it? So that we can go into sociology and why we have rights and things like that. So natural rights are things that we see as what the government's got to provide us with. So things like our health and well-being, and sort of our freedom and our freedom to speak, our freedom to express ourselves. If there's a social contract that says, well, we allow those people to tell us what to do as long as they give us certain rights, and if human flourishing is in your best interest, then the social contract is important to adhere to. If you want to destroy society, well, that's fine. But you know, what are you doing in the society? Don't be a part of it. It's kind of, yeah.
Using children like you do on
Do
your
you-
website, you say that's wrong?
For me, the problem has always been for the atheist who denies objective morality is what right do you have to tell someone else? Because they're just acting according to
Sure.
their subjective preferences.
Well, the subjective preferences, I find in these cases we often agree. So, for instance, if I meet a member of the Ku Klux Klan, we can find common ground in the sense that I might say, okay, so why is this wrong? Why is that wrong? Why? Until we get to the final point and they say, well, I think that it's because my worldview is better for humanity. And I say, well, hang on, so do I. I think my worldview is better for humanity. So let's go on the assumption that what we want is to get what's best for humanity. And here's how I think my worldview leads to that. So even people...
but if they say, but I don't believe black people are human, what do you say to
So,
that?
well, that's the thing. Then the discussion doesn't then the discussion becomes trying to prove how they are.
Right.
You sort of remove the need for a basis once you find out what the basis of their beliefs are. Once you find that common ground, for instance, me and you agree, you and I agree that, for instance, I assume that we would agree that human flourishing is a good thing.
Oh, sure.
But you would say that that's because you have that in you because of God. I say that I have that in me because
It's
of
not just
evolution.
because it's in me, but because there's an objective standard of goodness
Sure.
outside.
Yeah, then demonstrate that, Frank. Stop claiming it as a presupposition and actually demonstrate it. Because you can say, hey, I presuppose it. If I say, well, I reject that presupposition, I don't see any reason that's the case, then you've got to do something else to show that it is the case. And you can believe whatever you want, don't get me wrong, but you're claiming this knowledge based upon the fact that you're assuming it. And things like, well, it feels bad if there's no objective morality. And I don't like the consequences of there being no objective morality. So what? Doesn't mean it's true.
Ourselves.
Absolutely
And
fine.
so when you say that we can agree that we want to have a better society, as Justin pointed out earlier, you're implying a best, because in order to say something's better or worse, you have to imply a best. Well, what is that best? What is the ontological grounding of that
Well, not
best?
necessarily. You don't
No, because what's best to some people won't be best to other people. Tune in today here in the MR Markery chat, where we bring all the tangents all the time. Next up at 11, more existential tangents. Woohoo! Woohoo! There you go. There you go, Kamikaze. Yeah, so he's sort of saying better implies best. Yes, but what's best is different than other people. Thanks for headed. Love you back, buddy. Look, best implies different for other people. Like, you might be allergic to peanut butter, right? And so a world without, and this is what I don't get about T-Jump's sort of best possible world. A best possible world for you, if you're allergic to peanut butter, is one that has no peanut butter in it. Like, it just doesn't exist. That's best. That's the best thing. That's really good for you. If you love peanut butter, it is your favorite food and you can't get enough of it, that is not your best possible world. So the best varies for people depending on their circumstances. But, you know, what he's saying is, how do we get to the optimal state overall for people? So this idea of a perfect world, I don't think your ideas of like, oh, well, if you imagine something that's good, you've got to imagine something that's perfect. It doesn't exist. And if it is subjective, it's different things are perfect for different people. What we want to do is optimize what hits the notes for the most people while maintaining the base level things that we need to flourish ourselves. So at a base level, everyone just through objective through evolutionary processes will need certain things like food, water, shelter, things like that. At a base level, that can form our rights. Everything above that, you're trying to optimize the best for people. Yeah, no, T-Jump's best possible world sounds like, yeah, no, I agree, Samami. I don't know how he figures that out. I've got to have a conversation with him one day on that.
have to have, and this reminds me of one of Thomas Aquinas' famous 5 ways, the degrees of perfection.
Mhm.
There doesn't need to be an absolute perfection to have an idea of something which is more perfect than something else. And to your reference of C.S.
No,
Lewis,
I think there would have to be a standard of perfection.
Why? Do we have any reason why that is? Because perfection seems to be unobtainable. Like when you imagine perfection, there can always be something better than perfection. Like I don't think it exists, and I think that the idea of perfection is different for different people. So I don't get where he's going with that.
Or standard that you're aiming for to say you're getting closer to that standard or further away, better or worse.
it's like your reference to C.S. Lewis.
Uh-huh.
You can't know a crooked line without
Right.
having some idea of straight. I don't think that's true. For instance, think of it
Why
this
is it
way.
not true?
It's not a case, if you're talking about good and evil,
Mhm.
you don't need evil.
Well, there is no such thing as a perfectly straight line. That's the thing that he's missing. Like you give a certain angle for a line, but unless the atoms have to line up exactly for it to be a straight line. But we call a line without the atoms lining up a straight line. How straight are you talking about? It's really weird because the way that I sort of learnt about trigonometry and calculus and things is that a straight line is simply a curved line with an angle of 0. Like there's no such thing as a straight line. There are only curved lines, and a straight line is a curved line with an angle of 0, like an arc angle of 0. That's all that it is. And so unless you're lining up the atoms, but even if you line up the atoms, how do you know that the quantum fields are like this is the thing, you can always go more and more perfect. I don't think perfection exists, and I don't think there's any way to obtain it. So you're sort of referencing this concept which doesn't exist in the real world. It just doesn't.
No good. If you think about, say you have a flat plane.
You're absolutely right about that.
Think about you have a flat
You
plane.
don't need evil to know good. I agree with you.
So
you need good to know evil, though.
I don't think so either. If you have a flat plane, you can see like a hill, like a
this is where he's trying to smuggle good as the default position of an objective universe. The universe is just objectively good, and then evil is added to it. It's all presupposition. It's all presupposition.
Indentation on that flat plane. Now, the rest of that plane is not a valley. You don't need the valley to understand the hill. You just need the hill in comparison to what is neutral. So you can have evil compared to what is neutral. You can have good compared to what is neutral. You don't need the two extremes.
What would be your definition of evil?
My definition of evil? Well, that's a very broad thing. But if you're asking me, again, subjectively, anything I would say that unwarrantedly elicits human suffering or animal suffering to an extent.
Okay, so that would imply that it's the opposite of human flourishing. So it's very difficult to define evil.
Well, no, he's sort of saying, hey, you can just say this. Look, he's basically talking like you're talking about absolute standards, right? You're talking about absolutism. Like, so if you're taking an absolute reading of temperature, like something's absolute 0, sure. But what we're talking about is relativity, right? So relatives. So you can say, hey, it's colder than this other state. It's relative. We don't have to go to the absolute of 0 and absolute heat to get that relative standard. We can say, hey, this is colder than the other thing, right? This is what we're saying. We can say, hey, this is worse than that other thing, that state of neutrality. We don't need that absolute standard in order to check whether one thing is colder than the other. We know this because people can tell that one thing is cold, like it's cold outside, without knowing how it feels to be at 0 Kelvin, absolute 0, right? We don't need that absolute 0 to tell that one thing's colder than another. You don't need it. That's what you're trying to say. Like, unless you've felt absolute 0, you have no basis for telling if one thing's colder than another. No, Frank.
Reference
Not
to good.
necessarily. It's not. It may be the opposite of human flourishing, but it's also just the absence of no suffering. Not necessarily good, but no evil. Okay, I don't know if I'm getting my point across very well.
I think you're both doing a great job at representing your different sides. I guess the thing that I'm really interested in pulling out there, just to bring us back to that racism example, is can you sort of say that would you say racism has always been wrong, was wrong in every culture, time and place where it was practiced in the past? Or can you not actually say that if you're a subjectivist?
I would say if we're assuming that human prosperity is a good thing, and by good we mean best for human prosperity, then yes, racism has always been wrong. Yes,
right,
but only on that assumption.
Yes,
which
of
is
course,
an assumption
for the racist,
which is an assumption we all share. Maybe not the racist. In fact, no, the racist does share the assumption.
Yeah, and that's my point about the Nazis. The racist says they're interested in human flourishing, and slavery is good for that. So you can make the case they are wrong in that morality, because they are wrong that slavery is good for the flourishing of human society. As I've said in the past, it's not good for the slave. It's not even good for the master, right? Because what happens when you have a large amount of slaves is essentially you destroy the middle class. What happens is that the lower working classes essentially get devastated by that. They why would you hire a menial worker when you can buy a slave to do it for free? Essentially, that's what happens. And so that lower class, essentially, they become impoverished and eventually end up slaves. So, and without the lower class, the middle class can't sell anything. So merchants, vendors, things like that, they can't sell anything because nobody's making the money to buy stuff. All the people that are buying stuff are the middle class and the upper class, the people that own slaves. So take away the lower class, eventually the middle class falls into poverty. And what you end up with is an aristocracy and slaves. That's what you end up with, because the aristocracy aren't affected by selling things as much. They will be the ones owning vast amounts of property. They're not reliant on producing in order to make their way. They are secure financially. So the middle class essentially gets destroyed. They can't sell anything, so they end up slaves as well. So essentially you get a two-class system of the haves who own everything and slaves, and that's what you end up with. So it's not even good for the masters either. So yeah, it's not good for society at all. It is one of the reasons, not the only reason. There's a ton of things, but it's one of the reasons sort of that the Roman Empire collapsed. Lots of slave rebellions, lots of slaves rising up because they could not see it.
That human prosperity is a good thing.
They may not. They may think.
Yep, religious persecution is real, and it's mostly the religious doing the persecution. Yeah, it's mostly people of one religion persecuting another religion. So yeah, I agree. Religion's bad.
My own prosperity is the best thing. I want to live a selfish life that disregards other people's preferences.
If we did have a racist,
but the problem is, how do you? Again, all I'm saying is, and I think you're agreeing with me, is simply that there's no objective way of sorting between these different preferences people have. There's no actual sort of thing that says this is the correct way. We should all be, wanting this human flourishing.
It's a harsh reality.
Yeah.
I don't like.
There's no way exactly. This is the appeal to consequence. He says harsh reality. Yeah, it would be. I would prefer for there to be an objective morality, something that says, "Hey, you ought and ought not to do this, independent of what anyone thinks. The universe has in it, or the universe has been given it objective rules that say it should and should not be the thing." I don't think that's the case. As Alex says, it's a harsh reality, but we have to live with harsh reality. We have to accept what is in front of us, not just go like an argument saying, well, I don't like that there is no objective morality. That's not an argument. That's not an argument. You can hate it all you want. I dislike that people die. That doesn't mean they live forever. It doesn't. Not an argument.
It can make me uncomfortable, the idea that there is no objective as far as I'm
concerned.
concerned.
Thank you so much. Did I miss that? Oh yeah, welcome to the channel Beheaded Kamikaze. I love that your picture is like a beheaded guy. That's awesome. enjoy your emotes, enjoy your time with me. I will hopefully entertain, but I do like what Alex is saying here. He's sort of just being very, okay, yeah, it sucks. There's no objective morality. Sure, it sucks. But why should we believe there's an objective reality objective morality based upon we don't like the alternative? Why should we do that?
So do you understand Frank's view here, which is he sees that as such an obvious thing that you would have to, the premises against that, if you like, would have to.
Yes, but all he's doing is presupposing it to be the case. He's not actually made any rational, like, as much as he wants to say, okay, rationality comes from God, demonstrate it using rationality. Like, if rationality is so objective, you should be able to make a rational, logical argument that is so clear-cut. But you're not. You're basically, Frank is just saying, well, I don't like the alternative. The universe doesn't care. No one cares.
Much, much stronger than they are.
No,
to take away his instinctive view that this is really actually an objective reality.
I understand entirely. Think about hunger. Hunger is within all of us, and it is such a strong thing. We like if somebody is dying of starvation, that is all they care about. It is within them, but it's still a process of evolution. It's still a subjective psychological experience. It's not some kind of transcendental.
Hang on, Alex. Let me just ask you a question about that, because as Justin pointed out in his interview with Richard Dawkins a number of years ago, which is, by the way, in the new book.
Yeah. Okay. So Uncle Frank's shilling a book. Yep. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, buddy. Shill that book. Look, he's gonna shill. Everybody shills at a certain point in time. Like, I get you. It happens.
I don't need a publicist when I've got Frank in the studio.
It's a great book. Justin rightfully said, well, you tell the story, Justin, about how you said he was stepping outside of the evolutionary process.
I kind of had this interesting conversation in my very first encounter with Richard Dawkins, and I asked him why, whether if all our morality is essentially a product of undirected evolution, whether he can really say that rape is wrong. And he says, well, I do believe rape is wrong. Now, that may be a product of my evolutionary past, but that's a value judgment I'm going to make. And I said, but how do you make that value judgment? You have to step outside of this evolutionary process to say that's wrong. And he said, well, maybe, but it doesn't show that anything supernatural exists. And I said, but as far as you're concerned, the fact that we've believed rape is wrong is as arbitrary as the fact we've evolved 5 fingers rather than 6.
Well, no, it's because, I mean, I hate that we're now talking about sort of rape and stuff. It's terrible. And I'm so sorry if it's triggering anybody. I like I said, I haven't watched this for ages. I saw it probably years ago and I didn't watch it. So I do apologize. Trigger warning. Did not mean. And yes, consensually smash that like button. Thank you. I killed Earl. Thank you. The fact that antisocial behavior is so antithetical to our survival. So you're not looking at it as a social species. Again, tell me you don't understand evolution without saying I don't understand evolution, because the fact that this is an antisocial behavior, that our society rejects it, and it is rejected from a lot of societies, like other apes, for instance, can get into big trouble for forcing themselves on other apes. Like this whole idea, it breaks the social structures that have evolved over time. We have succeeded in part by having these social imperatives that say, hey, I can't do this within society and I can do this in society. So the adherence to these social norms are in part what guides us through survival. So I still think, even though evolution has lent us to behavior that fits with societal norms, so we have to adhere to the societal expectation of the structure around us, because that is something that we've evolved to do. There's nothing objective that says that it's wrong. It is antithetical if you care about human flourishing to do that. It is. But a lot of the time, that hasn't been wrong in human society. I don't think the Vikings really cared about the consent of their targets. usually what happens in societies, human societies, is that antisocial behavior is completely immoral within that society, but it's moral towards people who are outside of the society, others, if you will. It's this tribalistic thing that I'm talking about, that if you're doing it in your tribe, that's bad. If you're doing it to another tribe, that's fine. Like if you're killing people in your tribe, that is horrendous. If you're going out and causing havoc, you know, on the next tribe over, that's perfectly fine. That there's no problem with that. So I think this line of questioning about non-consensual sex, I think there's been a lot of times where that has been seen as objectively wrong, doing it to your own, and objectively fine doing it to the others because they're not blessed by Zeus like we are, or they're not the children of Thor like we are. So this whole thing that it's always wrong, that it doesn't seem to be the case in humans. But I think that if you agree that human flourishing is important, that there are certain rights like bodily autonomy that is the only way for humans to flourish and the only way for societies to flourish, and that societies that go out and attack their neighbors is detrimental to the flourishing of your society, because that violence will breed more violence. I think there is a way, if you care about your own well-being and the well-being of others, even your family and your friends, that you should not ought to do that, because it will be detrimental. Even if it is outside of your tribal group, it will be detrimental to yourself, your friends, your family, your tribe. It will be detrimental to everybody. And I would like to see tribalism dropped. I'd like to see us say, hey, we're all human. We've got to instead act as a species instead of a tribe of species. I think in order for us to truly flourish, that paradigm has to change. And I think it's sort of past time it changed.
And he said, yeah,
Yes.
basically. And I agree on naturalism, that is true, but most people recoil at that idea that our morality is essentially arbitrary.
Yeah. But in the same sense, this is what frustrates me about atheists a lot, is they'll do the same thing but the opposite. They'll look at God and they'll think of the evil. They'll listen to Hitchens talk about some celestial North Korea, and they'll recoil at that, and they'll say, that's a horrible thing. I can't imagine that reality. But I'm sorry, just because you don't like a reality doesn't make it not real. And so if
that's he's basically referring to the argument from consequence. Just because you don't like it, like I don't like that, you know, I'm still going to be poor tomorrow, so I'm going to put a lotto ticket in and I'm going to win. Just because you don't like the consequence of that not being true doesn't make it true. It just doesn't.
If there are no objective morals, then unfortunately what Joseph Stalin did in the USSR was not objectively wrong. But that's not a shocking thing to say if we're under the assumption that nothing is objectively wrong.
Do you understand then why for many people the moral argument is so powerful?
Absolutely.
Because they cannot...
Arguments for emotion are always powerful. They're always powerful because they appeal to our sense of horror and our sense of nostalgia and our sense of these emotions. You know, what makes us happy, what makes us sad, and religions appeal to these all the time. If you don't believe in God, you're going to go to hell. Doesn't that scare you? That's no reason to believe in it because someone's making you afraid. That's an appeal to emotion. Oh, hey Al, how you doing?
Get themselves to a point of view where those kinds of acts are only really about people's preferences.
But I don't think that's what Frank is necessarily doing, because I think you're right that a lot of people do just recoil in horror at the idea of there being no objective standard. But I don't think that's what you're doing. I'd say that you're being cleverer than that. You're understanding that yes, this is a bad idea, but more than that, you're saying that there's some way to prove that there is an objective reality.
Right. Now, bring it back. Yes, this is what Alex should be doing, and he is absolutely brilliant because he's brought it back to but you're recoiling, but you're saying that you can prove that there is objective morality. So let's do that. Let's show your demonstration of objective morality, and you know, 1,000-yard stare here as he's desperate trying to think how he's going to do that. I figure that what he's going to do is he's going to bring it back to, oh, but you believe in subjective morality. I bet you anything he's going to do that.
You don't like.
Yeah, I want to get beyond that, or maybe I should say underneath that.
Beyond that or under? I don't want to answer that question. I don't want to have to show how morality is objective. No. I want to get beyond it, or possibly under it, or presuppose it and move on, is maybe more accurately what he should be saying.
Going back to Justin's point, and it's this: if you said this is all the result of evolution, you have to get outside the evolutionary process to believe that thought is true.
If you want to say it's all about evolution, you've got to get outside the evolutionary process to believe that's true. Why? I don't understand why. What?
Because if that thought is a result of the evolutionary process as well, why believe it?
But again, it's existentialism. We have to have certain assumptions.
Yeah. So like you're basically saying, well, how can you trust your thoughts on evolution if your brain was made by evolution? Well, I mean, what other thoughts are you going to trust, Frank? Do you have an alternative brain somewhere? No, we evolved. We know we evolved because there's a lot of evidence for that. And that explains why we have the behaviors that we have. It explains it very, very well, in fact. You're basically saying, well, don't listen to your thoughts because it's a product of evolution. What thoughts are you supposed to listen to, Frank? Have you got another brain somewhere? I dread to think, like, what are you saying? Like, we've got to accept that these thoughts are the only ones that we have. We've got to start with these thoughts. The fact that you sort of say, hey, it evolved and rationality and logic evolved and we have these things in order to make sense of the world, it doesn't mean you can't trust them. I have as much confidence in them, and my senses, for instance, evolved. That's like saying, well, why do we trust our senses? Well, they're the only tools we have. What are you using, Frank? You're basically trying to say because evolution formed your brain, then you can't use your brain. This is really weird. It's like he's trying to sort of infer a circular argument without the argument being circular. Like, evolution doesn't tell us what to think. It just determines how we think.
What I'm saying, this isn't just an assumption. This is what we would call a properly basic belief. It's not just an assumption.
Oh, your presuppositions, properly basic beliefs. I've never liked the idea of properly basic beliefs. Basically, so a basic belief, that's essentially just an axiom, right? So an axiom is just a ground level belief that doesn't need to be proven. Like, so axiomatically, you could say, hey, my senses are correct. It's like a presupposition, except that it doesn't have the same level of, not confidence. Generally, you'll just agree on axioms when you start out. They call it properly basic beliefs because they want to say, well, other people's basic beliefs aren't true. If you want to have a basic belief that Allah is correct, that's not true. That's not properly basic. It's all smoke and mirrors. It really is. It's just a presupposition is what it is. That's all that it is. He's just saying axiomatically, i.e. as a base level, I'm going to assume this is true.
That I believe that torturing babies for fun is wrong. I think that's really true. It's not my assumption.
Well, I would say that, for instance, my belief that torturing babies is wrong is also a belief, but that's a belief based on the assumption that human flourishing is a good thing.
We're going to go to a break, guys, and we'll come back to this. Fascinating stuff today. And I hope it doesn't sound too much like it's 2 against 1 in this one, Alex. But it's one where I've always found the moral argument a fascinating one, because it does.
Likewise.
Whereas I guess cosmological arguments, they're about what's out there. I think this is very much about what's in here,
yes.
in our personal response to evil and good and so on. But anyway, great stuff. Does evil show that God exists is the debate today. Frank Turek and Alex O'Connor joining me in studio. Come back again in a few moments' time and we'll conclude today's discussion. I mean, let's maybe just in the final minutes we have here, gentlemen, talk about
and I noticed that he hasn't shown that in any way. Like, Frank hasn't shown it in any way whatsoever. He's basically said that evil shows that God exists. If there's evil, there's got to be good. Which, sure, okay, yeah, I'll grant. And if there's good, because good is defined as coming from God, then God exists. That is one of the worst arguments I've ever heard. Like, you're defining a God into existence. You're saying, hey, good equals God.
You raised in your original video, Alex. Morality often is blurred, you say. You raise examples of abortion and sexuality. These tend to be, though, questions involving humans and whether things bring harm or good along to them. And there, for you, that showed you that ultimately the morality is human-centric. It's subjective in that sense.
This is my burden of proof.
Yeah.
This is what I'm saying by it is simply that my argument in general is to say that again, I'm not explaining necessarily why things are right or wrong, but why we experience them as such. And certain places where we find moral ambiguity is such as issues like abortion, like you say. The problem,
yeah, and he's addressed sort of the instinctive way we look at morals. Like, we instinctively look at them this way, but that is a process of evolution. And he's sort of saying, hey, don't just take instinctive morals. So people talk a lot about moral intuition, and that moral intuition is a thing, and they rely on it. And some atheists rely on moral intuition. I was having a conversation with Ozian about moral intuition, and he just takes that as morality. And I think that's dangerous and wrong. Moral intuition is sort of your gut reaction at things. And I sort of point out that your moral intuition can say, hey, like, you might be asked to amputate a leg, and your moral intuition goes, I don't want to do that. That's awful. It may be in the best interests of that person to do so, but you have to sit down and think about it rationally. You have to go, okay, I've got to overcome this distaste, because this infected leg, for instance, we have to do this. People are trained all the time to overcome that moral intuition that says, no, I can't do this. You have to overcome it, because we can say that removing an infected leg that will kill somebody is morally good. Now, what we're saying is it's only morally good if we're interested in human flourishing and human life is important. But we kind of agree on that, so that's fine. But if you don't think human life is important, you'll go, no, I'm not removing a leg just to save some guy's I don't even know's life. If that's not important to you, so be it. Like, I don't think there's anything objective saying whether it's right or wrong. I don't think there's anything in nature that cares whether that person with the infected leg dies or lives. It just is, it matters to us. Matters to us. But our moral intuition would say, oh, that's awful. I'm not going to do that. I think anybody would think that. And the moral intuition comes from evolution, that we don't like to cause pain to those we consider in our social circle, while at the same time we kind of cause pain to people we consider others with a shocking degree of ease. I'll leave that for another time. But but overcoming that, we can go rationally, well, it is a good thing. And so I think that moral intuitions, while they're very, very, like any intuitions, they're very quick to make judgments. They're very efficient at making judgments. I don't think they're necessarily correct for the goal that we want to achieve. Some moral intuitions have to be overcome to achieve what we're trying to achieve. So, I think morality is different than moral intuitions, and I don't think moral intuitions are reliable.
If you ask me, we're not deciding here, is it okay to kill a human life or not? The abortion debate is surrounded around, is that a human life or not? If it is, then it's wrong to kill it. And to me, that's based upon the assumption of human flourishing, which again, I think is instilled by evolution. So it seems to me that this assumption of human flourishing that can be perfectly well explained through the evolutionary process seems to be a very compelling grounding for the experience of morality, especially when you consider things such as these moral ambiguities where they are based upon whether or not we're harming life or not. Same thing with animals.
Yeah, again, I'd like to just reiterate.
Yeah, and don't forget that Alex directed to you, you demonstrating that morality is objective, and you've just turned it back to exactly the same thing, Frank. That, oh, you know, I want to get past that and just go to this problem with subjective morality. Well, the easy way is just to demonstrate that objective morality is in fact true, but you're not doing that. You're presupposing it, assuming it, and then moving on and ducking and dodging. Like Frank, but you know, we know why he's doing it. Let's face it. I mean, part of this is rhetorical, people. I know why he's doing it. It's because he can't demonstrate it. He can't. If he could, he would have done so by now, but he can't. And you know, he might be right. You know, there might be some God in the universe that cares whether it's objective or not, but you can't demonstrate that. So Alex has no reason to believe you.
That if the evolutionary process gives us our moral ideas, it also gives us all of our ideas. So why should we believe any of them? But secondly, not every issue needs to be crystal clear on morality for God to exist. You know, scientists disagree over aspects of the objective world, but that doesn't mean there isn't an objective world. That's a difference between, again, epistemology and ontology. We all agree there's an objective world. We may not agree on certain aspects of that objective world in science.
This is the very kind of conversation. I had a bit of a Twitter spat last week with an atheist. We were talking about objective morality, and one of the things he said was the fact that people disagree about morality means that it is subjective.
Yeah,
that's not necessarily true, but the argument from moral diversity is a good argument to show that morality is not objective. I think that is a good argument. That there seems to be very little that people do share that is immoral. That cultures over the time have done things that we consider vastly immoral and would consider moral. I think there is an argument to be made there. But yeah, I don't think it's a hard proof, but I think it is one of many things that provides the argument.
So you don't buy into
No,
that?
not at all.
Because that's often the assumption. If we disagree about something, it must be subjective.
It's silly.
Yeah.
It can be confused. I'm not trying to say that because we disagree on things, because people disagree on things like sexuality and abortion, therefore morality must be subjective. What I'm saying is that if you are trying to propose the view that morality can be explained through evolution, this is bolstered by the fact that the certain things that we do have moral ambiguities on seem to align with that. We don't discuss whether or not murder is right or wrong, and to me the reason for that is because of the fact that it involves human flourishing, human survival.
Okay, so murder's a legal term, by the way. He should be saying killing. And one of the things is that that societies everywhere, they don't see killing as wrong. They say murder is wrong. But murder is just a legal designation for a justified killing. So I think you should be focused more on killing rather than murder. Because if you want to say killing is objectively wrong, then you've got to say, well, every person that used self-defense is immoral, and every sort of defensive war is immoral, and everybody that's ever done accidentally killed somebody. Yeah, you've got to attach so much immorality to it. I think there are times when killing somebody is a moral action. Like if you're defending your family against somebody trying to kill them, then that would be a moral action. We sort of have a moral standard for when it is justified and when it is not, and the law So I would step away from murder and go to killing, because either killing's moral or it's immoral. We seem to think it's relative to the circumstances. I'm not sure how you justify that.
If the question is, will this act cause humans to suffer? Will this act cause a human to die in the instance of abortion? That's why that moral ambiguity exists. And so to me, the point is basically that this is evidence of an evolutionary basis for morality.
Well, no, I would say, as you mentioned earlier, on abortion, if it is a human being, you don't kill it. That's not mysterious at all. The only question is it a human being? And I think scientifically we can show it is a human being. People just don't like that. I think many a time.
Not sure you can show it's a human being. I think there's more to a human than cells. I think that sort of when we're sort of saying a person, it comes with sort of a cognitive process that isn't there in the early stages of development. It's just cells. It's living human cells, sure, but just because something's a human cell doesn't make it a human. I could peel off a bit of my skin before it dies. It's a human cell. It doesn't mean I've killed a person, right? If I gouge myself and take a chunk out of myself, I've killed human cells. It doesn't mean I've killed a person. This is really weird. This is sort of a composition division fallacy in a way, because we don't see a human being as just some human cells. That's like, saying, hey, down at the IVF clinic, there's a freezer full of human beings. No, they're eggs, they're cells. It's a difference.
The reason people disagree on morality is not because they don't know the right thing to do. They just don't want to do it. In fact, there are some on the other side of the pond in my country who are saying,
now he's presupposing they know the right thing to do. I wouldn't start talking about what other people know is the right and wrong thing to do, Frank. Unless you can claim to read minds, that's just a presupposition on your part. But hey, add another presup to the pile. Let's go. Let's presuppose everything.
And we know it's a human being, but that's okay. We get to kill it anyway.
There are even those who have proposed infanticide. Peter Singer has made the case that because a newborn baby doesn't have any of the faculties that we develop as we go on in terms of our mental ability.
Atheist positions that incorporate moral realism. Yeah, I'm not a moral realist, Jordan. So I can probably steelman their position if they think it comes down to natural laws born of evolution or other natural processes, a objective imperative for us to flourish, sort of a hardwired kind of thing. But I'm not sure if I'm doing it justice. I don't think cosmic skeptic's a moral realist either. He seems like a meta-ethical relativist like me. So I don't think I can give you an argument for that. I could give you arguments, but I would have to sort of play devil's advocate on that one, mate.
And so on, they shouldn't be counted necessarily as having the same kind of rights for personhood that a 3-year-old would have to say. Now, that's obviously, again, he's just shifted the issue into like not whether we're human or not, but whether we have this quote unquote personhood issue.
Yeah, this is.
I mean, it's incredibly
is perhaps
murky,
one of the issues perhaps with proposing objective morality, because what we're saying with something like this, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. For instance, when we talk about hunger earlier being a natural instinctive thing within us, there are people who are anorexic, there are people who are obese. There are exceptions, but that doesn't mean that evolution can't explain how we experience morality. It doesn't necessarily mean that the things are right or wrong. This is the thing I think we're disagreeing on. I'm not saying because of evolution killing a human is wrong. I'm saying that because of evolution, the reason that we don't want to kill humans can be explained.
Yeah, so basically he's saying that evolution has compelled us to value something, but it's not a compulsion that we have to follow. It just sort of wires us with that tendency, because our own survival is something that we sort of are wired towards. However, there's nothing objective saying that we ought to follow that compulsion. Just as he's saying there's nothing about hunger that says that you have to eat, because people can go on hunger strikes, people can have anorexia, people can go on incredibly long fasts. You can ignore that natural compulsion. You don't have to do it. So, and he's sort of saying the same thing.
But do you see, or maybe I'm not explaining myself clearly, Alex, do you see that?
Oh, no, you're explaining it yourself clearly, Frank. You just don't really make any sense. You're just sort of supposing everything and not actually giving any real reasons for anything. You're just sort of saying, hey, I don't like these ideas.
Evolution has given you your moral beliefs. It's given you all of your beliefs, including the idea that evolution has given your moral beliefs. So why should you believe it? It's either random on evolution or it's designed.
But,
so
I mean,
no, it's either random or deterministic. Like this is the whole thing. It's either random or designed by an intelligence. No, that's not correct. That's not right. That's like sort of saying, hey, all the stones in a river are round. That's either random or it's designed by an intelligence. No. Frank, stop. Ugh.
If it's designed, you can trust it. If it's random, you can't. So again, if all your thoughts are the result of the laws of
if it's designed, you can trust it. If it's random, then you can't. Look, have you ever sat on a chair that's broken? Like, you know, it's just this sort of real black and white simplistic thinking that either things are random or they're designed by some intelligence. So we've got to break apart what designed means. Things are deterministic. Okay, like if you're looking at the physical properties of the universe, nothing is really random. Random in the physical universe just means things that we cannot figure out the deterministic process. Like when you drop a stone on a cliff, it looks random the way that it bounces and skitters and falls down the mountain. But we know that it is these physics that is causing it to bounce one way and the other. If we could compute the physics enough, exactly down to, you know, particles and atoms, we might be able to figure out exactly which way it's going to fall. But there's so much in it, we just call it random. Are things truly random? I think some things are. I think that there are random states or probability states of quantum fields. There seems to be some random probabilities of how quantum states, like we can say, hey, here's the probability of this thing being at this location, and it's all probability. But it's kind of this. Well, yeah, he's making a false analogy. He really is.
Physics. Why should you believe any of them?
Well, I might be talking out behind here, but is that not similar to saying, well, the reason that you're saying the reason I got from evolution, I also got everything else from evolution, so why should I trust it?
Right.
Well, the reason that you got from God, you also got everything else from God, so why should you trust God?
Well, because God has given us the rational ability to make reasonable claims or discover truth about reality.
Hasn't evolution given me the rational ability to uncover truths about reality as well? What's the difference?
Because our minds are trustworthy if they're made.
And this is the thing, like you get everything from God, so why should you trust your mind that's been given by God about God? And wait for the special pleading. He'll say, oh, because it's given by God, my rationality is trustworthy, but yours isn't.
Made in the image of the great mind. Why would they be trustworthy if they're a product of random forces?
Well, how do you know it's a great mind?
It's not random. It's not random. This is the thing. Frank Turek, he keeps getting told one thing, and it's because he is so ingrained in his misunderstanding, he just refuses to actually listen. It's kind of frustrating. It's kind of like, Uncle Frank, I've told you that, you know, I don't like football 5 times and you still want to talk to him. Uncle Frank, stop. I don't want to talk about footy with you, Uncle Frank. Stop. Like, seriously, I've told you 5 times I don't like football. Uncle Frank, it's not random. It is a guided process. What's it guided by? The environment, the set of circumstances that leads to that organism's survival. So the mutations are random, but the actual evolution is a deterministic process.
The great mind has instilled that reason within you to reason that it is a great mind.
Because I'm going from effect to cause.
Right.
If I have
by using reason.
Yes, by using reason.
God gave you. So using the reason that God gave you to prove the reason
that God is the ontological foundation of the laws of logic, which allows us then to discover truths about reality.
What I'm saying is that you seem to be doing the same thing as I am. You're saying God is giving you this reason to reason that God is the most reasonable being.
God has given us the tools of reason, which are objective.
God has given us the tools of reason. Why should you believe that reasoning that says that God gave you the reason if it comes from God? If you're using the reasoning, you're using God's reason to prove God's reason. This is the thing. He's just not getting it. He's used the same thing on Alex. Like, why should you believe the reasoning if that reasoning? Why should you believe the reasoning came from evolution if that reasoning came from evolution? And he said, well, the same applies to you. Why should you believe the reasoning that comes from God if you're using that reasoning to prove the reasoning? And he said, oh no, but that's the ontological foundation. No, you don't have access to ontology. You're using epistemology to get there. You're just presupposing that is the ontological. So whenever this word ontological comes up, think reality. So he's basically saying, hey, that is in reality true, therefore it's true. It's terrible. Turek is terrible. Why didn't nobody tell me Turek was this terrible?
They're immaterial.
I think people did. That's a joke. I think people actually did. I've been warned.
And he's given us the free will to either follow him or reject him based upon what we learn about.
Can you demonstrate any of this? And if that reason comes from a God, do it without the reasoning that God gave you. Because God could have given you a flawed reasoning to find the wrong answer because he's actually really evil. What if God's evil and he gives you flawed reasoning to get to the wrong answer? What if there is no reasoning given to you by God and it's just your evolutionary reasoning and you've just assumed it's a God because it's flawed? Uh-oh. But Uncle Frank's already determined that footy is good. I mean, that God is the ontological source of reasoning. Therefore, it has to be true. Therefore, it just follows that he's correct about everything.
Reality and whether or not we want to follow.
I mean, as I understand Frank's argument, it's one of those.
Yeah, jump in and save him. Jump in and save him. Frank's struggling. He's drowning. Help Frank. Throw him a lifeline.
This explanation, we both acknowledge we are completely dependent on these laws of logic, this rational capacity we all have. Can we explain such a thing on a naturalistic worldview, or is it better explained on a theistic worldview? And obviously Frank's view is, yes, it makes sense that we would be able to trust our rational abilities if there is a rational mind behind the universe. Whereas in a non-rational universe, a non-rational process by which we came to be, there's no fundamental reason to assume that we are aimed at knowing right from wrong, truth and falsity.
You do have to make certain assumptions.
Yeah.
Like it does frustrate me that I will never know if I exist.
Yeah,
that gets on my nerves.
Who's asking the question?
It really gets on my
Who's
nerves.
wondering that?
This sort of stuff really gets on my nerves. But they are just unanswerable.
Gets on whose nerves? What do you mean?
Well, precisely.
Yeah, that's not a solution to the problem, Frank. They're going into hard solipsism, and yeah, it's a big problem. But Frank's like, oh, I've solved hard solipsism. No, Uncle Frank, you haven't solved hard solipsism. No, you haven't.
These are just sort of pedantic little things that gnaw away.
I don't think they're pedantic.
Something like
reason. Stop interrupting, Frank. It something like reason. Yeah, so you have to make some presuppositions about reason, and we can go on to the presuppositionalist thing and why they sort of say, hey, we presuppose they come from God, and you say, well, I don't know where they come from. They're generated by they're described by humans, but why are the properties of the universe the way they are? I don't know. But if you want to claim they come from God, you've got to demonstrate it, not just presuppose it and then demand everybody accept your bald-ass assumption, quite frankly, because that's what it is. It's a bald-ass assumption.
I submit that, okay, you could make the argument that if reason comes from evolution, how can we use that to then reason about evolution? Sure, but I'm saying, is that not the same thing with God?
No, because God is a rational creature, or not creature. He's the ground of rationality.
Says
who
who?
gives rational? Because we're
Says who? The people using his rationality to confirm him. This is a circular argument. This is 100% a circular argument. I have rationality. Rationality comes from God. I know it's correct because of the rationality I got from God, because that has to be true, because God's the fount of all rationality, which I decided earlier. Oh, precepts never change. Never change.
Reasoning from our rationality back
using
to
the reason that came from where?
Well, of course, his ontological nature is given us these laws of logic to discover truth.
How do you know that? Through reason.
Right. You can't defend reason by reason because that would be circular.
Precisely.
Right. But what we're saying is once we have reason, what better grounds it? naturalism, which couldn't explain the laws of logic to begin with, or a mind whose very essence grounds these laws.
What you're saying, what you've just said is you said, okay, so we assume that reason exists. What's the best grounding? When I give you grounding, you then say, but how do you know that reason even exists? How can you say that reason exists if it's just a process?
Because
so I could put the same thing to you. I could say, if reason does exist, what's the best grounding? And you say God, and then I could say the same thing and say, well, if you're getting that reason from God, how can you use that reason to then prove God?
Yep, that's exactly it. You're basically you're founding these in. You're essentially going, well, there's the logical absolutes, the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle, or what do you call it? The law of inference was what Frank said. No, it's the law of identity. So you've got these sort of absolutes, and so Frank wants to sort of say, well, where do they come from? What's the most likely explanation to come from? You don't have an explanation, and you presuppose they exist. I presuppose that they come from a God. Well, we've got no reason to accept that. We both agree that they exist, right? We both agree that these logical absolutes exist. But you're trying to say, well, then you should believe me when I say they come from a God. But you don't have any kind of demonstration for that. You're just assuming it. And that's the problem.
Because that's how you prove anything.
Right. That's
okay.
That's
so
how you prove evolution.
again, no, because in evolution, everything is predetermined. There is no free will. We're just the result of the laws of physics. No, not everything.
God is omniscient. He knows the future.
He
How
knows,
can there be free will?
because knowing the future doesn't mean he's causing it to occur.
Well, is he not causing it to occur?
He's the primary cause. Now we're getting to predestination evolution. I don't know if we're predestined to get into this point.
That's another show we'll have to come back.
No. I'm not a 5-point Calvinist, if that's what you're saying.
Let's leave it there for a moment. We've
yeah. So they go into free will at this point. And that's sort of off the side. So what he's saying is absolutely correct. If you're sort of saying, hey, you're using the reason you got from evolution to reason about or to think about where that reasoning came from, and you've said it leads back to evolution, it's kind of circular. Kind of, I guess, if you're, if you want to say prove that your reasoning leads anywhere without using your reasoning. But Frank's doing exactly the same thing. He's saying, hey, this reasoning that we have leads back to a God. I'm going to found it there, and then that gives me a justification for the reasoning. But you're using your reasoning to find a reason for your reasoning anyway. So it doesn't really get to the heart of the matter. It doesn't really, you're making a bigger circular argument, and it's not a virtuous circular argument. What we found is we've sort of examined a lot of behavior and realized that a lot of our other behaviors are a product of evolution. They're a product of the way that brains have developed, and not just human brains. Okay, it's not just, hey, this is what humans have, because in some way, Frank's got to explain why we see comparable behaviors, not exactly the same. I wouldn't say they rise to the level of morality, but we do have comparable behaviors in things like animals. So this sort of leads us to make the justified evaluation that these behaviors, they vary between species, they vary between sort of the way that our brains have developed, but the development of the brain in some way is connected to these behaviors and rationality and cognitive function that we see. I don't think that's a great stretch. And there's a lot of unknowns in here. Just saying evolution doesn't solve a lot of these problems, like why consciousness at all? Why do we sort of the mind-body problem kind of thing? There's a lot of problems in it that we're beginning to unravel. But what Frank is doing is saying, well, I'm going to presuppose it's a God, and everything that God says is true and is not deceptive in any way. I'm going to then use that presupposition that it's not deceptive to say, hey, the God exists and he gave us these tools. But like I said, all you have to do is insert the demon in there, that the demon gave you these tools, knowing that it would lead to a false conclusion. It's a flawed tool. Your argument just falls down. And a lot of the things that we have through evolution, we kind of go, they're not useful anymore. We're not saying, you're saying that because God gave it to me, it's good. We're not saying that about evolution. We have some very flawed tools in evolution. What we're doing is using the tools and the matter that evolution gave us to see what works and what doesn't, what produces the outcomes we want and what produces the outcomes we don't want. We're not saying that all of our cognitive functions are foolproof. We're not saying that all of our intuitions are foolproof. We just don't know that for sure. And there are a lot of evolutionary behaviors that just are not useful. You know, tribalism is just not useful anymore. It's just not. It causes so many problems and so many issues. You know, the unregulated sex drive that a lot of people display is not useful anymore. It has to be regulated. A lot of these things are not useful, and we're discovering this. So, yeah, I think that Alex did fantastic. I mean, Frank's been in the game for ages. He's been in this game for ages. And this is a sort of 17-year-old young man who's calmly and sort of, you know, against two people. This isn't against one. I mean, the host it was clearly a Christian show. The host was clearly on his side. You know, he just flailed around for a while and the host would jump in saying, hey, this is what another thing kind of thing. But notice at the end of the day that Frank directly got asked questions like, can you demonstrate this comes from God? And he's like, well, I want to get beyond that or under it maybe. No, you want to point out problems with subjective morality or your emotional issues with objective morality, things that you don't like about it. You know, it's like saying, well, if viruses exist, then we're going to be at the subject of all of these horrible things. Yeah, we are. Sure. It doesn't make it not true. If viruses exist, then we're going to be relying on, you know, vaccinations and all of these medical industries. And yeah, it sucks. It does. Totally sucks. And also very true. This is the thing. He could just end it by just saying, hey, this is how we show morality comes from God. But he can't. That's the thing. He can't. He's got nothing besides that assumption. And yeah, he is a presuppositionalist through and through. I can tell that. I haven't even watched that much. I've seen some of him, but this one was particularly bad, especially his, well, let's just skip that morality comes from God and essentially just assume it. Yeah, terrible. Well, you know what, Steph, it's hard to find people doing Christian debate that are not monsters. It's hard to find. It's really hard to find. I was actually, and, you know, that'll wrap it up for that. But, you know, I just want to reiterate again, this is a young man studying philosophy. And at 17, I would probably be a mess at that point. Like, you know, just bleh. I don't know. I have high hopes, and I think that more people should pay attention to Alex O'Connor, and his calm discussions of things rather than, you know, the throw your hands up and create a dumpster fire kind of stuff. I really think so. I think it's yeah, and as Robin says, please hit the line button. Yes, the line button, very important, very important. There's the milk mistress herself. Fantastic. Yeah, but I was considering having James Hake on. I don't know how you all feel about that. I'm kind of worried he would say stuff that's really, really horrible, and I'm not going to like it. But he's horrific. He is horrific. With his views on women and Black people, African Americans. It Yeah, no, I kind of strongly disagree with his positions. Is it worth having him on to debunk those positions and show him why he's wrong, or not? Is my question. So I might do a poll in my community. So if you want to vote on it, please do. I don't know. I don't think so. Yeah, yeah. I know. I hear you. I hear you. But the problem is finding Christians who are not. That's the problem. Seems like they're sort of, they're galloping down that right-hand wing these days. I'm finding it hard to find people that aren't bigoted at all, to be honest with you. Yeah, no, I hear you. I do hear you. It's just, the name a Christian that isn't at least a little bigoted when they go on channels. That's the problem. They're kind of, yeah. Well, that's true, Samami. That is true. Yeah, and it's just the it's just the level of prejudice against these groups is horrible. Oh, look, Jordan, I've said my piece on it. I said my piece last week. I think, and it's my personal opinion, I'm not going to trash anybody, but I think they're just showing what gets views. I think that's what gets views. That's it. Yeah, I know, but I don't want to make this channel about getting views. I don't. I want to do what I want to do. I want to do what makes sense to me, and it does make sense to me what people want to see, but I would rather I would rather have people like my core audience, like you guys, like the wonderful people that are here spreading love, see what they want to see rather than appealing to a massive base. And I get that. So yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, non-evil Christians, yeah. No, Matt, I'd never had on. Rebecca, yeah, no, Rebecca won't talk to me, Stephanie. Rebecca basically says that she isn't talking to people like me. I think that I come across as very scary from my debates, but I'm really not. I think a lot of people are surprised by. Yeah, no, Rebecca won't talk to me. She does not want to come anywhere near me, not for any particular reason, I imagine. I just think that I mean, I do argue. Yeah, Disciple Day's quite nice. He is, you're right. And I think Christian from what's that thing? Proverbs guy is quite a nice guy. Father Charles, I'd like to talk to, because they seem like they're sort of, no, we're going to at least have some okay views. I think some of the things they say is horrible, but they're not outrightly hateful. Christian Pike, yep, that's him. Yeah, Christian the Christian. But anyway, thank you so much for coming along. This has been another debate dissection, and I'm glad we sort of, I mean, Turek is Turek. I think that he kind of got smoked on this one. I think that his inability to actually go into why morality comes from God is a reason why this was so huge. And I think that having seen it again in retrospect, I think that Alex O'Connor, I think he perhaps should have been more aggressive on the pressing him for his God stance. And he sort of went there at the end, but he was very young, and he certainly learnt a lot since. I believe he was doing philosophy in college kind of thing. So or in university. So he's sort of more of a philosopher now. And I've got to revisit Alex, because Alex is really good and very calm and reasonable, which is a good thing. Thank you so much, everybody. Really good to see you. Now, don't forget, be kind to yourself. Treat yourself with kindness. It's important. Like I was talking with Wat about all those personalities, be nurturing to yourself. Don't be harsh, and be kind to other people, because we're all humans and we're all interested in human flourishing, or most of us at least. Everybody here, I would accept. I guess, Kamikaze, I might put a poll up for my next one. Might be a good idea. Alex and Peter Hitchens. Yeah, it wasn't long and it was a bit of a dumpster fire. I think at least this week, Kamikaze, I'm over the dumpster fires at this point. I am over them. You know, I get that they're appealing to a lot of people, but it's too much at the moment. I want to hear some reasonable, rational discussions. And I think we got that from this. I mean, I don't agree with Turek, but at least he wasn't screaming at somebody for 2 hours. That's great. So much love, everybody. Take care and have a fantastic night or day, wherever you are. Much love.